Chapter 481. If she didn't agree, she might be able to live a little longer. Once she agreed, her little life would come to an end. Therefore, Ning Shuema's lips curled up slightly. In your dreams. She was indeed an extraordinary little girl. Every decision she made was beyond his expectations, and it only piqued his interest and made him even more reluctant to let go of her. He also smiled. Little Shuema, let's wait and see. The tip of his foot kicked off the surface of the water, and his body floated up as light as a feather. Together with the net, he carried Ning Shuema and flew to the bow of the boat. The people on the ship were already boiling. Just now, Shuailan and Ning Shuema's conversation was sometimes high and sometimes low, so they also heard a few sentences. No one would have thought that the ordinary-looking Miss Shui would have so many entanglements with this heavenly master. This master who didn't put anyone in his eyes was actually pursuing her, and she clearly didn't take this man seriously. Other than saying no, she kept rejecting him. It's not fair. It's not fair. Is this the so-called ugly people make more trouble? Is this the so-called good men don't have good wives? Everyone looked at Shuailan with different gazes, all kinds of emotions. Of course, they also saw Ning Shuema in Shuailan's arms. Ning Shuema was tightly held in Shuailan's arms. Her small face was almost buried in his chest, so no one could see her expression. That kind of posture was too intimate. Who knew how many girls' hearts were broken? It also made the eyes of a few girls who had just been in love quietly turn red. Yin Ziyuan was worried about her good friend. She didn't care about anything else and hurriedly stepped forward. Shui, are you okay? Did you choke? Ning Shuema was still in Shuailan's arms and only said a few words. I'm fine. You guys can leave. Yin Ziyuan didn't know what the red-clothed evildoer was planning to do by bringing her on board the ship. With his murderous temper, it was obviously not safe for Yin Ziyuan to stay on the ship. It was best for her to leave as soon as possible. Yin Ziyuan didn't understand the meaning of Ning Shuema's words. She couldn't help but take a step forward. I heard that your voice is a little hoarse. Did you choke? I have some medicine for your throat. I said I'm fine, so I'm fine. Who asked you to be a busybody? Ning Shuema's tone was very fierce, but she was a little anxious. If Shuailan found out that Yin Ziyuan was her friend, he might use Yin Ziyuan to threaten her. Yin Ziyuan was stunned. Shui, what's wrong with her? Why was he suddenly so impatient and fierce with her? Her face was slightly pale, and she was a little hurt. Rong Yin pursed her lips and smiled. Miss Yin, Miss Shui is now the master's personal person. It's enough that she has his concern. Why do you have to ask for it? Haha. Rong Yin's laughter disgusted Yin Ziyuan. She coldly looked at her. Rong Yin, if you don't speak in a strange way, no one will think you're mute. I can care for whoever I want. What's the matter? A sentence blocked Rong Yin's mouth. Rong Yin's face changed, but she still pretended to be a white lotus. Miss Yin, although you don't want to recognize me, I'm still your sister in name. I just want to care for you. I don't want to see you get bullied. Sister? Yin Ziyuan sneered. Her voice was cold. Your surname is Rong, and my surname is Yin. We don't have any blood relationship. What kind of sister are you? You want to enter the Yin mansion's door so much? You don't even want your own ancestors? These words were a little harsh. Chapter 482. Rong Yin was so mean in public that she couldn't continue to act like a white lotus anymore. Her face sank. Miss Yin, we as the younger generation shouldn't ask about our parents' right and wrong. But you've gone too far. Our father has already accepted my mother as his second wife. In any case, she should stay by our father's side. It's fine if you don't agree, but you're also trying to prevent them from reuniting and separating them. Is this your filial piety as a child? In this era, men marrying and taking in concubines was a very common thing. So the people present at most secretly laughed at Madame Rong's lack of virtue, but they didn't think there was any problem with Yin Darren taking in a second wife. In addition, Rong Yin intentionally or unintentionally created an image of her mother enduring humiliation in front of everyone. She even intentionally or unintentionally made people misunderstand that Rong Yan's mother was actually Yin Darren's childhood sweetheart. Because Madame Yin used a scheme to get the position of the mistress of the Yin family, Madame Rong was sad and married to the Rong family. After the decline of the Rong family, Yin Darren felt sorry for his old lover and took them to the Yin family. Then the two of them relapsed and got together again. Rong Yan's mother didn't care about the hatred of Madame Yan's interference. She was benevolent and righteous, endured humiliation, and was willing to be a concubine. This kind of story was obviously more in line with the aesthetic of the poor couple, so everyone sympathized with Rong Yan's mother, who was placed in the outer residence and couldn't enter the Yin family. The people present were all scholars. This kind of people had a bit of pride and didn't fear power. They sympathized with the weak from the bottom of their hearts. At this moment, seeing Yin Ziyuan being aggressive, they couldn't help but be a little angry. This mouth, that mouth, whether overtly or covertly, criticized Yin Ziyuan for being unfilial and arrogant and domineering. Rong Yan's weak posture won the sympathy of everyone, so she couldn't help but feel proud. Looking at Yin Ziyuan's green and white face, she felt particularly relieved. She began to habitually play the role of a white lotus and sighed softly, "Everyone, Ziyuan is still young and insensible. I won't blame her as her elder sister. I only hope that she can see that her father is old and lacks a caring person by his side. She won't threaten him with her life and prevent them from reuniting. As for me, what's a little grievance? I only hope that my parents can live well and enjoy the happiness of a family." Yin Ziyuan was so angry that her hands were trembling. She was a straightforward girl and didn't know how to beat around the bush. At this moment, Rong Yan's words made her so angry that she raised her hand to slap Rong Yan's face, which made her feel incomparably disgusted. Her talent in telekinesis was actually quite good, and she had received guidance from a famous teacher in the Yin manner. Her martial arts were also quite good, and this palm strike brought with it a sharp gust of wind. Rong Yan's talent in psychokinesis was average, and her martial arts practice was just so. Saying that her martial arts were flowery and impractical was a bit of an exaggeration. How could she escape from Yin Ziyuan's angry palm? He was so scared that his face changed. She screamed, "Brother Ziyan, save me!" She had already finished her sentence, but the slap still hadn't landed on her face. Her heart stirred, and she opened her eyes. Gu Ziyan grabbed Yin Ziyuan's wrist with one hand. At the critical moment, it was Gu Ziyan who decisively saved her. Yin Ziyuan's slap was stopped halfway by Gu Ziyan. He held her wrist and said in a deep voice, "Ziyuan, don't go too far." Chapter 483. Yin Ziyuan's wrist hurt from being held by him, and her heart also seemed to hurt. She suddenly struggled. "Take your dirty hand away." Gu Ziyan's face slightly changed, and he subconsciously let go of her hand. He loosened his grip a bit too quickly, and Yin Ziyuan happened to be struggling with all her strength. Coincidentally, Yin Ziyuan was shaken a bit and retreated a few steps. She couldn't stand still and sat on the ground with a plop. Coincidentally, her head hit the corner of the table next to her. Blood flowed down her forehead. Everyone seemed to have not expected this scene, and they were all stunned. Gu Ziyan's face changed, and he reached out to help her. "Ziyuan." Yin Ziyuan seemed to have been scalded by fire, and her body slightly moved to the side, avoiding his hand. The little maidservant who accompanied her had already rushed over and hurriedly helped her up from the ground, almost crying, "Miss, you're bleeding." Yin Ziyuan shook her head. "It's okay." Her forehead was burning with pain, but compared to the pain in her heart, the pain in her forehead was nothing. Her forehead was bleeding profusely, and in the blink of an eye, it had already flowed to her cheeks. The little maidservant hurriedly treated her wound, but because she went out to participate in a zither recital, which was an event for scholars, the little maidservant didn't prepare any ointment for bruises. At this time, she anxiously paced around. "Miss, this servant should die. I didn't bring any ointment. I have some here." A hand reached out, and there was a bottle of Jinshuang ointment in the palm. It was a very beautiful hand, and it was obvious that it was used to play the zither. Following the finger, it was Gu Ziyan's uneasy face. The little maidservant looked at Yin Ziyuan, but Yin Ziyuan turned a blind eye to that hand. She casually tore a piece of her sleeve and raised her hand to wrap her head. "It's just a flesh wound. No need to use any medicine." She raised her sleeve, revealing her once white wrist. There was a dark purple circle around her wrist, which was caused by Gu Ziyan in a moment of desperation. Gu Ziyan's eyes moved from her bleeding forehead to her bruised wrist. His face turned even paler. He raised his hand and held Ziyuan's hand, which was about to be bandaged, and stuffed the ointment into her hand. This wound must be treated, or it will leave a scar. Yin Ziyuan abruptly snatched her hand back. Her movement was big, and Gu Ziyan was also apprehensive. He didn't dare to hold her hand tightly, so she broke free. Even the medicine bottle in his hand fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. The ointment flowed all over the floor. Pa! With a loud sound, Gu Ziyan's heart seemed to shatter along with the medicine bottle. Gu Ziyan paused and looked at her angry eyes. Ziyuan, I didn't mean to. Yin Ziyuan secretly took a breath and pulled the corner of her lips. I know. You were just worried about Rong Yin. You can't allow her to be hurt. Yin Ziyuan smiled bitterly in her heart. She understood everything, but she couldn't see through the barrier of love. That's why she repeatedly got hurt because of small things. Her eyes seemed to be filled with tears. She didn't want to stay here any longer. She had already lost face, and she didn't want to make herself more embarrassed by crying here. She was about to bandage her wound and immediately get a boat to leave. Behind her, a hand silently stretched out. There was also ointment in the palm. Miss Yin, use this. Yin Ziyuan raised her head and looked into the eyes of a black-clothed youth. The black-clothed youth's eyes were calm, but the hand holding the ointment was very steady. Yin Ziyuan breathed a sigh of relief. Chapter 484. The young man in black was her shadow guard. Yin Ziyuan was lively by nature and liked to run around. Her father was afraid that she would get into an accident, so he assigned a shadow guard to her, named Yifeng. Yifeng was not much older than her, around 18 years old, but he was much calmer than her. No matter where Yin Ziyuan went, he would always follow her silently. Yin Ziyuan was at the age where she was rebellious. She worshipped freedom and hated it when someone followed her around, making her unable to have fun. So she cried and argued with her father a few times, asking him to remove this shadow guard. Unfortunately, her father had always complied with her wishes, but he refused to back down on this matter. Yin Ziyuan vented all her anger on Yifeng. As long as she saw him by her side, she would never give him a good look. So Yifeng really became a shadow guard, secretly following Yin Ziyuan around, making her unable to discover him. He would only appear when she met with extreme danger. 2 days ago, Yin Ziyuan went to the capital to watch the Heavenly Master's enthronement ceremony. She only brought a servant girl with her. Like a fat sheep, she wandered around outside and came back safely. In fact, it was all thanks to this shadow guard who helped her deal with all the dangers in the dark. This time when Yin Ziyuan boarded the ship, she did not see Yifeng. She thought that she had finally gotten rid of him this time, but she did not expect that he had also boarded the ship and was so quiet that she did not notice him at all. Where was he hiding just now? Although she did not like him, but his appearance at this time helped her out of her predicament. She took the ointment from his palm and let the servant girl help her apply it. Yifeng was very well prepared. Just as the servant girl finished applying the ointment for Yin Ziyuan, he handed over a tray of snow-white bandages. Gu Ziyan stood there, and he was left hanging there. His fingers were clenched tightly in his sleeves. Yin Ziyuan's rejection of him was very serious, and that shadow guard was standing between him and Yin Ziyuan. He could not even see the corner of Yin Ziyuan's clothes. This shadow guard, in addition to being a Guqin master, Gu Ziyan was also a psychokinesis master. If they were to really fight, not many people present would be his match. He was also very good at judging people. Normally, when someone passed by him, he would be able to sense the strength of the other party's aura. From there, he could estimate the depth of the opponent's kung fu. It was rare for him to make a mistake. But today, he saw 3 people he couldn't see through. The first one was Ning Shuema. This little girl didn't seem to have a high psychokinesis, but her aura was very strong. The second was Shui Ilan. This red-clothed man not only had a strong aura, but his psychokinesis was also unfathomable. Just looking at him made him feel anxious. That feeling was like a rabbit meeting a tiger. He knew that this person must not be provoked. The third was this shadow guard called Yifeng. This youth was like a peerless sword hidden in its scabbard. He had a calm demeanor. Although he was silent, no one could ignore him. Gu Ziyan could not see the level of his martial arts at all. Yi Feng's face was not the kind of handsome face that was popular nowadays. His face was strong and simple. His face was handsome and his eyes were deep and calm like the sea. When he looked at Gu Ziyan, that kind of coldness made Gu Ziyan's heart turn cold. After Yin Ziyuan's head injury was bandaged, Yi Feng said, "Miss Yin, the boat has been prepared. Do you want to disembark now?" This person was very understanding. Yin Ziyuan could not wait to leave this place, and Yi Feng had prepared everything for her. Yin Ziyuan was very satisfied. Chapter 485. Yin Ziyuan was very satisfied. When she looked at Yi Feng again, she didn't feel so disgusted. She nodded slightly. "Okay, let's get off the boat." She couldn't help but look in the direction of Ning Xuema. She could leave, but her friend was still in that man's arms. Would she be in danger? That man's red clothes were as dazzling as the morning sun. She didn't know when he had sat down at the head of the table. Ning Xuema was still trapped in his arms and couldn't even raise her head. He held Ning Xuema with one hand and supported his chin with the other. He looked in the direction of Yin Ziyuan with interest, as if he was watching a play with relish. Seeing that Yin Ziyuan was looking at him, he patted Ning Xuema's back. "Little Xuema, your friend is really good. She suffered such a grievance and still can't let go of you." Ning Xuema's heart was anxious. She wanted to kick Yin Ziyuan away. In such a dangerous place, the sooner she left, the sooner she would be safe. Although she had only known Yin Ziyuan for a day, she already understood her temper. She was a passionate, naive, and chivalrous little girl. If she knew that she was in danger, she would probably blindly stay and provoke this evildoer. Her little life could be lost in minutes. She sneered and lightly said, "Friend? Who treats her as a friend? I just want to participate in this zither recital, win this prize, and use her as a ladder to cross the wall." This sentence made Yin Ziyuan's face turn white. She had a simple temperament, so she couldn't think of Ning Xuema's thoughts. Today, she had been betrayed twice in a row, making her angry. She coldly snorted, "Okay, I recognized the wrong person. So you were just using me. Yi Feng, let's go." Yi Feng glanced at Ning Xuema, then silently turned around and walked beside Yin Ziyuan. He didn't seem to have the consciousness of being a servant. When he spoke to Yin Ziyuan, he didn't bow and salute. When he walked with her, he didn't lag behind like a servant. Xue Yilan still sat there without any intention of stopping her. Ning Xuema, who had been guarding against him, let out a sigh of relief. As expected, Yi Feng had prepared a small boat under the ship. The small boat was made of ebony. Although it wasn't big, it was sturdy enough to accommodate 3 or 4 people. The suspension ladder to disembark from the boat had already been set up. The young maidservant led the way and boarded the small boat. Yin Ziyuan followed behind, while Yi Feng brought up the rear. Yin Ziyuan's dress fluttered as she approached the small boat. The young maidservant had already reached out her small hand and stood at the bow of the boat, wanting to support her. Yi Feng, who was walking at the back, suddenly had a change in expression. He flew up and picked up Yin Ziyuan, then turned around and flew away. Yin Ziyuan was caught off guard and cried out in alarm, "Yi Feng, what are you?" Before she could finish her sentence, she heard a loud bang behind her, followed by the young maidservant's miserable cry. It went straight into Yin Ziyuan's ears. Following this loud bang, the suspension ladder also broke. At this moment, Yi Feng hadn't rushed back to the ship yet. When the suspension ladder broke, he immediately fell from the sky with Yin Ziyuan in his arms. People on the ship cried out in alarm because they saw that the small boat had turned into a fireball. Yi Feng and Yin Ziyuan were falling right above the raging fire. At this critical moment, Yi Feng shook his hand, and a black ribbon flew onto the ship and wrapped around one of the masts. Yi Feng pulled on the ribbon and flew up like a big bird. He finally returned to the bow of the ship and put Yin Ziyuan down safely. Chapter 486. Yin Ziyuan was still in shock. She calmed herself down and rushed to the bow of the boat. Zhu. Her servant girl was called Zhu. She was on the small boat that was on fire. At this moment, she had turned into a big ball of fire along with the small boat. There was no way to save her. Yin Ziyuan and Zhu were master and servant in name, but in reality, they were like sisters. When Yin Ziyuan saw that she had died for no reason, her eyes turned red and she almost jumped off the bow of the big boat. Be careful. Yifeng pulled her back. His voice was still calm. She is already dead. My condolences. Yin Ziyuan was so angry that she couldn't help but slap him. What the hell are you doing? Why did you prepare a small boat that could catch fire? She was heartbroken and lost her ability to think. Pa. This slap landed on Yifeng's left cheek. Yin Ziyuan's hand was numb from the shock. She was also stunned. She didn't expect that she would really slap him. Yifeng's left cheek was left with a red palm print, but he was still as a mountain. Even his voice didn't fluctuate. It's this subordinate's negligence. He apologized, but he didn't let go of Yin Ziyuan's hand. Yin Ziyuan didn't want him to hold her. She tried to shake him off, but she couldn't. She was so angry that she almost stomped her feet. Bastard. Why are you holding me? Let go. Miss Yin, sorry to offend you. Yifeng didn't have the intention to let go of her. He used a little strength and pulled her closer to him. The people who heard the commotion frowned. They all felt that this shadow guard was too daring. He actually kept holding his master's hand. The concept of hierarchy in this world was very strict. The master was the master, and the servant was the servant. Everyone present scolded Yifeng, asking him to let go of their master. Gu Ziyan also spoke. Yifeng, she is the master and you are the servant. It's not proper for you to hold her like this. Yifeng turned a deaf ear to everyone's reprimand. He looked around and frowned. Everyone also subconsciously looked at the surrounding scenery. Suddenly, they cried out in surprise. Hey, where is this? What a thick fog. Is that a deserted island? How did we get here? No, this is not the lake. There is no island in the lake. Unknowingly, the surroundings were covered in white fog. The fog covered the sky and the surrounding scenery. People could only vaguely see the small island through the gaps in the thick fog. What was going on? Everyone looked at each other, a bad feeling rising in their hearts. The previously bustling ship was now like a ghost ship. The surroundings were gloomy, and even the lanterns hanging on the mast had become blurry, like the wisps in the fog. What's going on? Someone asked anxiously. Brother Ziyan, I'm scared. Rong Yin was like a little bird clinging to Gu Ziyan's side. Let's go into the cabin. Someone trembled and suggested, taking the lead to run into the cabin, as if it was safe there. Brother Ziyan, let's go in too? Ask the steward what's going on. Rong Yin also suggested, tightly pulling Gu Ziyan's arm. Gu Ziyan did not answer her. His eyes fell on Yin Ziyuan. Yin Ziyuan was pulled to Yifeng's side. Her face was pale, but she was still calm. After her outburst, she had already figured out that the fire on the boat had nothing to do with Yifeng. It was an accident that even Yifeng did not expect. Chapter 487. Yifeng had always been a reliable person. For such an accident to happen, it shouldn't be a coincidence. It should be man-made. She immediately thought of the mysterious red-clothed man. All these abnormal things, could it be that he was behind it? But he had no enmity with the people on this ship. Why would he do this? She couldn't help but look at Yifeng beside her. Do you know what's going on? Yifeng did not answer her. Suddenly, he turned his body and pulled her behind him. It was a protective posture. His sharp and cold eyes looked into the cabin. Clap, clap, clap. There were 3 crisp claps in the cabin, and a lazy voice said, I didn't expect there to be a master on this ship. Young man, your skills are not bad. You can still escape. The voice was slightly hoarse, but it was unusually magnetic and pleasant to the ears. It was Shui Lan, who had been silently watching the show. I don't know why you set up this puzzle, and I don't want to know. But my lady has no enmity with you. Why do you want to kill her? Yifeng said in a low voice. Must there be enmity before I can kill? Shui Lan chuckled. I just like to. He answered as if it was natural, but it made everyone's expression change. If you like to kill, then kill without asking for any reason. This theory is too demonic. This person is not a master. He's clearly a demon. Everyone looked at the chaotic scene around them. and they were all flustered. "Who the hell are you?" Someone shouted. "I'm not a human." Shwet Elon's voice was light, as if it carried the murderous aura of a water ghost. It made people feel a chill down their backs. Not a human? Then he's definitely not an immortal. Could it be the legendary demon? "What is your purpose for coming here?" "I heard the sound of the zither and came here to compare notes with everyone," Shwet Elon answered elegantly. Everyone looked at each other again, and they secretly sighed in relief. If it was just to compare notes on zither skills, it wouldn't be too dangerous. "I don't know how the master wants to compare notes. Grandmaster's zither skills are brilliant. There are only a few people here who can match up to Grandmaster." Rong Yen boldly asked. "You mortals naturally can't compare to me," Shwet Elon replied bluntly, "but I can allow you to fight as a group." Team battle? What did he mean? Everyone didn't understand. Fortunately, Shwet Elon still had an explanation. "You can form a group of 8. If your Guqin can surpass mine, then you win." Everyone let out a sigh of relief. In terms of the beauty of the zither, they might not be a match for the red-clothed man, but 8 zither against 1 zither was a sure win. All they had to do was to play the zither at the highest volume. "If we win, will your excellency remove the camouflage and let us go?" "Of course." "Then, what if we lose?" "If you lose, you'll naturally die," Shwet Elon replied casually. On this boat, there was no lack of people with fiery tempers. One of them, although his zither skills were average, his martial arts were first class, and he had a small reputation in Chongkong country. When he heard Shwet Elon's words, he was dissatisfied and angrily said, "Even if it's a competition, you should pay attention to mutual consent. Your Excellency using such a petty trick makes people laugh coldly. We don't want to compete with you." Just as he finished speaking, he suddenly felt something stuck in his throat, and his body was lifted up in the air. This person's hands and feet moved chaotically, desperately struggling. Chapter 488. The man struggled with all his might, but he couldn't break free from the shackles of the inexplicable power. His body flew backward involuntarily, and with a whoosh, he was thrown off the boat and fell into the water. After the man fell into the water, the force around his neck disappeared. He coughed twice and immediately moved his hands and feet, trying his best to pop his head out of the water. At this time, his heart calmed down a lot. He knew how to swim. Swimming more than 10 miles was like playing with water. He felt that although the scenery in front of him couldn't be seen clearly, it should be a trick. He should still be in the lake. The depth of the lake was only about 10 miles. He just needed to find a direction and swim. He had a good plan, but he didn't expect to see a blackback swimming towards him as soon as he popped his head out of the water. Before he could react, the thing had already popped its head out of the round table and bared its sharp teeth at him. "Help!" The man tried to escape, but his speed in the water couldn't be compared to the monster. The monster bit his thigh and pulled him into the water. Violent splashes and streaks of red appeared under the water. The people on the boat were so scared that their legs turned to jelly. They watched as the man was torn apart by the monster and disappeared. There were only a few streaks of dark red liquid spreading in all directions in the rippling water. "Monster! There's a monster in the lake." "No, maybe this isn't the same lake anymore. Then where is this? Hell?" Some of the timid girls were so scared that they lost control of their emotions and screamed. "It's so noisy." Shwet Elon sighed in the cabin. His voice was as soft as the wind, but it carried the darkness of hell's messenger. The 3 girls who screamed also felt their necks tighten. Their bodies were lifted into the air at the same time. They struggled with all their might, but they were also thrown into the water. Just like before, they were swallowed by the monster that suddenly jumped out of the water. The screams of the girls under the boat were ear-piercing. The people on the boat were all pale and their legs trembled. They didn't dare to make a sound. Hair. It's hair that's strangling them. It's a strand of hair. Someone with good eyesight finally saw it and couldn't help but shout. Hair? Or just one strand? Everyone looked at the cabin door and then at the bow. The distance from the cabin to the bow was at least a dozen meters. How long was his hair? Strange. It was too strange. This was really not a human. At this point, No one dared to raise any objections. They could only agree to Shue Ilan's conditions. Shue Ilan chuckled as if he was very satisfied. They are indeed very obedient. He paused for a moment. Little Shuema, they are much more obedient than you, bastard. Let go of me. Ning Shuema's angry voice came from the cabin. Why should I let him go? Little Shuema, you are too slippery. Once I let you go, you will run away again. Although I am very happy that you have found so many zither players for me, 100 of them are not as good as one of you. Shue Ilan's words were very affectionate, but they also dragged Ning Shuema into the water. Bastard, I. Ning Shuema's rebuttal was suddenly blocked. She could only make a vague sound. Everyone looked at each other again. Was that girl called Shue really in cahoots with this red-clothed devil? She obviously came to this zither recital with ulterior motives. Then they all looked at Yin Ziyuan. Although they didn't dare to complain at this time, their eyes were obviously angry. There would be a few more chapters during the day. Mumu created a new VIP group. The group number and the description of joining the group were posted at the top of the comment section. Chapter 489. Yin Ziyuan's face was pale. How could she not see the condemnation in everyone's eyes? She raised her chin and said in a low voice, She's not on the same side as this person. I believe in her. Ning Shuema was still trapped in Shue Ilan's arms. She didn't struggle because she knew that it was useless. She was just looking for an opportunity. But this opportunity was too slim. She hadn't found it yet. Shue Ilan's hand was still covering her mouth. Shuema didn't try to push it away because this scoundrel had warned her that if she bit his finger, he would use his lips to block her mouth. Shue Ilan purposely pulled her into the water. She was originally sad because she thought that she would lose Yin Ziyuan as a friend. But she didn't expect to hear Yin Ziyuan's words. This short sentence warmed her heart. That silly girl. Didn't she know that protecting her friend at this time meant going against everyone present? Naive and hot-blooded. She was a bit like one of her subordinates in her previous life. At this time, Ning Shuema had already made up her mind. She didn't care about anyone else, but she had to care about Yin Ziyuan's safety. Even if she herself was like a clay bodhisattva crossing a river, she still had the ability to threaten this bastard. If necessary, she would throw her life away. Little Shuema, what kind of crooked idea are you thinking of now? Shue Ilan used his finger to lightly press her nose. His tone was gentle, but his actions were frivolous. Ning Shuema simply closed her eyes and ignored him. I didn't think that a heaven-cursed lonely star like you would have friends. Shue Ilan lightly sighed. A single stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. The people outside already felt that the name Shuema sounded familiar. At this moment, when they heard the words heavenly calamitous lonely star, they immediately thought of Ning Shuema's identity. She's Ning Shuema. Right. The orphan from Marquis Jingyuan's estate. So even her name is fake. She even said something about being called Shue. Miss Yin, you treated her as a friend, but she might not. Even her name is fake. No wonder we encountered such an unlucky thing. It's because a heaven-cursed lonely star came on this ship. God, whoever comes in contact with her is unlucky. Although the discussion outside wasn't loud, Ning Shuema's hearing was good, so she could hear every word clearly. She laughed bitterly in her heart. Heaven-cursed name as a lonely heaven, cursed lonely star's name. Oh right, how could it be her? Isn't she engaged to the heavenly master? Tomorrow is their wedding day. Someone blurted out the inside story. Ning Shuema's expression slightly changed. The news of her marriage with Han Shanyue was only spread to the officials of the imperial court. It was unknown why Emperor Lu Xian had sealed this news, so the commoners did not know the inside story. She didn't think that there would be someone here who knew so much. Logically speaking, tomorrow was indeed her wedding day with Han Shanyue. If she didn't run away, she would be carried to the heavenly master's estate and married to the new heavenly master. Although she didn't want to marry him, it was better than falling into the hands of Shue Ilan. So it was better for her to stay still? Now that she couldn't even keep her life, Han Shanyue should have known that she had escaped. With his ability, it shouldn't be difficult for him to track her down, right? But he didn't show up. It seemed that he didn't take her seriously. You're actually engaged to that bastard? You promised him? Chapter 490. You're actually engaged to that bastard? You promised him? While Ning Xuema was somewhat absent-minded, Shui Ilan's somewhat perturbed voice entered her ears. His handsome face was no longer full of smiles. Instead, it was completely gloomy. A dark aura surged out from his body, causing the usually calm Ning Xuema to inwardly shiver. However, she fearlessly replied, "What does it have to do with you? What does it have to do with me?" Good question. Shui Ilan sneered. Since you're not going to say it, I'll verify it myself. Verification? You can verify an engagement? Ning Xuema still hadn't recovered from her shock when her clothes were suddenly ripped apart by him. The sound of fabric being ripped apart was extremely ear-piercing. Ning Xuema's expression changed. Bastard, what are you doing? She desperately struggled to push him away. However, at this moment, she was in Shui Ilan's hands. She was like a lamb in the hands of a butcher. She couldn't escape from his hands. Shui Ilan's fingers brushed her body. She couldn't move and could only watch as he took advantage of her body. He wouldn't want to force himself on her right here, right? This bastard would definitely do it. Ning Xuema was both angry and angry. Her charming face was flushed red, and her heart almost sank to the bottom of the ocean. Although she was a modern person, she wasn't open-minded about sex. Her first time was still very important to her. This matter was mysterious and beautiful to her. It was an extremely solemn and sacred thing. Her first time should be with the person she truly loved, leaving a beautiful impression for the rest of her life. The aftertaste should be warm and intoxicating. She shouldn't just do it with any random man. This was the main reason why she ran away from the marriage. She felt that she didn't have any desire for Han Shanyue and was afraid that he would force himself on her wedding night. However, she didn't expect to escape from the wolf's den into the tiger's den. She successfully ran away from the marriage, so she didn't have to worry about being forced by Han Shanyue. Instead, she was being raped by Shui Ilan. Bastard, if you dare to do anything to me, even if I die and turn into a ghost, I will hunt you down. Ning Xuema gnashed her teeth. At this time, she was already prepared to fight this bastard to the death. No matter how valiant she was still a young girl. Under such circumstances, she couldn't help but feel nervous and afraid. Her big eyes were about to spit fire. You can't do anything to me when you're alive, but you think you're powerful as a ghost? Shui Ilan sneered. Obviously, he didn't take her words to heart. He lifted her chin with his finger and looked into her eyes. I forgot to tell you. This seat is very good at dealing with ghosts and whatnot. Even if you bite your tongue and commit suicide now, I can still capture your soul. You won't be able to escape from my grasp. His fingers were warm, but his words were colder than the cold wind. Ning Xuema. What kind of pervert did she let out? Shui Ilan looked down at the curvaceous body in his arms, and his eyes gradually heated up. I knew it. There was something fishy about you suddenly growing up. You actually ate the ice blue fruit and soaked in the original spring. Ning Xuema was left naked in his arms. Her heart was filled with hatred and anger. Hearing him mention those two things, she immediately thought of the fruit Han Shanyue gave her and the hot spring she had soaked in it. Was there something special about those two things? So what if I ate it? So what if I soaked it? She tried her best to ignore her current awkward state. Fortunately, she was still wearing her panties and underwear. Although they were thin and short, at least it was better than nothing. Chapter 491. You don't know what it does, yet you dare to eat and soak in it? Shui Ilan stared at her chest. Her flesh-colored underwear rose and fell as she breathed. Ning Xuema was well-developed. She was tall and handsome, and her cleavage was well-defined. Wearing that strange-looking underwear made her look even more seductive. Shui Ilan's eyes darkened. Ning Xuema's entire body turned cold from his fiery gaze. She tried her best to divert his attention. What is its function? Don't tell me you don't know. The combination of these two can restore your original body, Shui Ilan explained. Suddenly, he thought of something and looked surprised. Aren't you 13 years old? Why do you look like a 16 or 17-year-old? Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She only knew the effects of these two things today. Restore my original body? Could it be the age to restore my soul? She was 22 years old in her previous life, but her face and body were still very young. She liked to wear her hair like a little girl with bangs, which made her look even younger. People often mistook her for a 16 or 17-year-old high school student. Could it be that her current body was her previous body? Of course, she wouldn't tell Shueilon about her suspicions. She just glared at him and said coldly, "Can I look older? My mental age is older. I always feel that you look younger." Shueilon lifted the belt of her underwear with his fingertips. He lifted it a little higher. He was obviously doing something frivolous, but his expression was very serious. It didn't look like he was taking off a girl's clothes, but more like he was dismantling a bag of explosives. He finally broke the belt of her underwear. Ning Xuema didn't have time to scold him. Her forehead suddenly heated up, and her eyes suddenly lit up. White light dazzled her eyes. It was as if a thunderbolt had exploded in her ears. With a loud crack, Ning Xuema's body shook and seemed to fall to the ground. However, she couldn't react in time. There was only a line of words in her mind. Damn, I was struck by lightning. I was struck by lightning again. Her ears were buzzing and her eyes were temporarily blinded. For a moment, she couldn't figure out what was going on with her. When the buzzing sound in her ears passed, she opened her eyes. Only then did she realize that she had already left Shueilon's embrace and was lying on the ground. Although the clothes on her body had been torn by him, fortunately, they hadn't been torn off from her body. They were still half covering her body, covering most of her body. As for Shueilon, even though Ning Xuema was extremely nervous, she couldn't help but laugh out loud the moment she saw Shueilon. After being struck by the thunderbolt, Shueilon looked a bit weird. His bright red, fluttering robes were now half charred black and half dark red. The charred half was falling off piece by piece, while the dark red half was becoming thin and brittle. With just a slight movement, it started to crack horizontally and vertically. This wasn't the funniest part. The funniest part was his hair. Originally, his soft black hair was draped over his shoulders. When he walked, it was naturally flirtatious even if he didn't act coquettishly. But now, his hair was all standing up, like a porcupine with its hair standing on end, pointing to the sky. His handsome face didn't look any better. At this moment, it was as if there were dark clouds densely covering his face. It was even scarier than the green birthmark. His appearance reminded Ning Xuema of the extremely miserable Ouyangfeng in the movie Eastbound Westbound. Chapter 492. How did he get struck by lightning for no reason? Ning Xuema was extremely puzzled. Could it be that the oath he made that day was effective? No, he didn't make an oath in front of the Devil Lord. Oaths shouldn't have any effect on him. That mighty bolt of lightning just now was like the legendary heavenly lightning that the heavens used to punish evil people. Could it be that the heavens finally couldn't stand it anymore and sent down heavenly lightning to strike this pervert? No, the heavens shouldn't be so timely. Ning Xuema suddenly remembered that she had been struck by lightning before and her heart skipped a beat. Could it be that she had an additional lightning flash skill when she was struck by lightning? It was effective at the crucial moment? Bastard, you really did agree to him, and it's a heavenly marriage. Shueilon's voice sounded sinister. He looked at Ning Xuema with a vicious gaze, as if he couldn't wait to eat her up. Ning Xuema was stunned and finally realized that something was wrong. Could it be that when she casually agreed to Han Shanyue's proposal by the lake, the heavens were the witnesses? Like an oath that couldn't be broken again? No, it can't be. How could it be so magical? That day when she was struck by lightning and had a cinnabar mole, it wasn't a coincidence but a mark, a proof? She couldn't help but raise her hand to touch her forehead. Just now, there was a sudden heat. Her cinnabar mole usually looked like it was drawn with a cinnabar brush and couldn't be touched. But now, when she touched it, it felt like it was slightly protruding and she could touch it herself. Shueilon actually saw the cinnabar mole on her forehead a long time ago. But at that time, he thought it was a girl who liked to look beautiful and put on makeup. So, He didn't take it to heart and didn't care at all. Now that he saw Ning Xuema raise her hand to touch it, his gaze naturally shifted there. When he saw it clearly, his eyes narrowed slightly. That Han Shangyue. He wasn't an ordinary human. When Ning Xuema raised her hand, she finally realized that she could move. She rolled and wanted to jump up. A figure flashed in front of her, and her acupoints were sealed again. She fell to the ground with a thump. I'll talk to you in detail later. Be good and wait here for now. Shui Ilan lifted her up and carried her to a nearby chair to sit down. His scorched black robe rubbed against her body and face. When Ning Xuema fell into his embrace, she could even feel the warmth of his skin. Shui Ilan seemed to have suffered some injuries from the lightning strike, and his movements were not as nimble as before. His every move was no longer so frivolous. He moved a few times, and the red robe on his body had almost fallen off. It was even more tattered than the clothes worn by the beggars of the beggar clan. He cursed under his breath as he tore off his robe and threw it to the side. His outer and inner robes were already in tatters. Naturally, he didn't want to wear them anymore. He simply tore them off, leaving only a pair of underpants. Ning Xuema had been staring at him hatefully. When she saw him suddenly take off all his clothes, she was shocked. She saw half of his naked body. Although this man was devilish, he had always been well-dressed in front of Ning Xuema. His clothes were not out of place at all. He was the kind of man who was dressed casually. This was the first time she saw him take off his clothes. She didn't expect that this devilish man who looked as thin as bamboo would have such a good figure. Broad shoulders, narrow hips, perfect collarbones, perfect Apollo's belt, well-defined 8-pack abs, and a lean waist. Everything was perfect. The only imperfection was that because he had just been struck by lightning, his face was still a little dark and his skin was a little yellow. Chapter 493. Do I look good? Shui Ilan turned around and looked at Ning Xuema with his arms crossed. A trace of ridicule flashed through his eyes. Ning Xuema realized that she had been staring at his body for more than 10 seconds. She felt a little embarrassed, but she did not show it on her face. It's just us. My body is just SOSO? Shui Ilan walked in front of her and lifted her chin. His eyes narrowed dangerously. Then tell me, whose body is not Han Shanyue's? Did you see his body? Ning Xuema was speechless. She had never seen the body of that big block of ice. She hadn't even seen his face clearly. Sometimes, she could clearly see his face, but she did not know why. She would forget his face in the blink of an eye. Even now, when she thought of that person, she still could not remember his face. He did not wear a mask, but he looked like he was wearing one. That person dressed very carefully. His wide sleeves wrapped himself tightly like a rice dumpling. Not even an inch of his skin was exposed. Perhaps if she did not run away, she would be able to see his body when they consummate their marriage tomorrow night. You miss him? Ning Xuema felt a sudden pain in her chin. Shui Ilan pulled her thoughts back. Shui Ilan's voice was like ice rain. You really saw him? Ning Xuema was annoyed by his jealous tone. She sneered. He is my fiancé. What's so strange about seeing him? His body is 1,000 times better than yours. No, 10,000 times better. Since this guy was so vain, she would say something that would anger him to death. You are looking for death. Shui Ilan was furious. He raised his hand and wanted to tear her clothes, but his hand stopped halfway. He stared at Ning Xuema for a moment and smiled. You are still a virgin. How could you see him? Little girl, you should be more careful with your words. His finger caressed her lips. It doesn't matter even if you've seen him. When I undo your heavenly marriage restriction, I'll let you have a taste of a real man. His lips came close to her ear, and his warm breath brushed against her face. My skills in bed are excellent. I'll definitely make you, and you'll never want to leave me again. He was so close to her that Ning Xuema felt goosebumps all over her body. His words were obviously a little obscene and flirtatious, but coming from his mouth, it didn't sound vulgar. Instead, it had a kind of seductive charm. Ning Xuema closed her eyes slightly and did not respond to his words. She did not want him to do something even more despicable. Shui Ilan smiled. His mood seemed to have improved slightly. Seeing how tough you are usually, I thought you wouldn't care about this. It turns out that you know how to be shy. Out of nowhere, he took out a robe and put it on her shoulders, covering her body tightly. From now on, only I can see your body. No one else is allowed to see it. Do you hear me? Ning Xuema was too lazy to care about him. A faint light lit up in Shui Ilan's palm and covered his entire body. The light circled around him and disappeared after a while. He stood up again. Miraculously, the blackness on his face that was caused by the lightning strike had disappeared. It was as if he had just taken a shower. His whole body was refreshed, and his skin was as white as jade. He stretched out his hand again, and a new set of robes appeared in his palm. He seemed to like the color red, and the robes were still red. Chapter 494. He seemed to have a preference for red. His robe was still red. He slowly put it on. He smoothed out his hair that was slowly falling down. Actually, from the moment he used his hair to throw people, there was no one else in the cabin. They all ran out of the cabin like a gust of wind. There were only the two of them in the big cabin. After a while, Shui Ilan returned to being a handsome young man. However, his waist-length hair was much shorter. The ends of his hair were damaged by the lightning, so he simply cut them off. He tidied everything up and sat down in the center of the cabin. He lazily said, "The first group can come in." The commotion in the cabin just now naturally caused the people outside to be in a state of shock. None of them dared to come in and take a look. The scenery around them was still dark. The big ship floated in the water. No one knew where it would drift to. There were man-eating monsters in the water. Moreover, it wasn't just one. They saw 7 or 8 of them just now. Those monsters surrounded the ship. From time to time, they would reveal their dorsal fins. No one could leave. If they wanted to live, they had to defeat the red-clothed evildoer. There were 38 Guqin players outside, including the judges. There were 2 judges who were too old and didn't meet Shui Ilan's requirements. They were sent out. The other 36 people were split into groups of 8. There were still 4 people left as substitutes. In this group, Gu Ziyan's prestige was the highest. He was the one who assigned the groups. He matched each group according to their own playing characteristics, striving to achieve the most perfect result. The people were divided into groups. The leader of each group was the one with the best Guqin skills. No one objected. At this time, everyone had to be united to survive. No one dared to fight for anything. Yin Ziyuan kept waiting for him to assign her to a group, but she didn't expect that in the end. He still didn't seem to see her. He still looked down on her, right? He thought she wasn't worthy of being a group leader. Yin Ziyuan felt bitter. Fortunately, she was used to being disappointed and didn't take it to heart. At the end of the line, Gu Ziyan called out her name. Ziyuan. He then called out a few more names. We'll be in the same group. If it was in the past, being assigned to the same team as Gu Ziyan, she might have been overjoyed. But now, she wouldn't think about it anymore. Her piano skills were indeed complementary to Gu Ziyan's, so it was natural for her to be assigned to the same group. Rong Yin had been nervously waiting for a long time, but she still hadn't been assigned. Seeing that the last group had been assigned, she couldn't help but ask, "Brother Ziyan, can I be in the same group as you?" Gu Ziyan didn't even look at her. "No, you can be a substitute." Rong Yin was startled and looked at the other 3 people who were also substitutes. The 3 of them also looked weak and delicate. It seemed like Gu Ziyan was really taking care of her. She felt a sweetness in her heart. "Brother Ziyan, I'll listen to you." At this time, being a substitute was much safer than being a team member. While speaking, she glanced at Yin Ziyuan in a teasing manner. "Miss Yin is also a substitute." Yifeng, who had been watching with folded arms, suddenly said coldly. Gu Ziyan didn't say anything, but Yin Ziyuan promptly said, "No, I and Master Gu Ziyan's piano skills complement each other. We can cooperate to suppress each other's piano skills. For the sake of everyone's safety, I will fight." Her words were calm, official, and rational. Yifeng didn't speak and still stood beside her. Chapter 495. Gu Zian looked at her with a complicated gaze. She had always called him master, but this was the first time she called him Great Master Gu Zian. Her voice was clear and crisp, but he felt that it was extremely harsh. He took a deep breath and suppressed the indescribable feeling of irritation in his heart. This was not the time to think about messy things. He had to explain to everyone what they should pay attention to when cooperating. He was indeed a great master of the ancient zither. He had special instructions for each group, and each instruction was important. In this kind of life and death situation, everyone listened very carefully. He had just finished explaining when Shui Ilan's voice came from inside, allowing one group to enter. According to the plan, the first group of people walked in without hesitation. After a while, the sound of the zither finally came out from inside the cabin. Because Shui Ilan had told them in advance, only one group was allowed to enter at a time. The others could only wait outside and could not peek. Otherwise, if he found out, he would kill everyone to silence them. Because of this threat, these people naturally did not dare to take the risk, and all of them pricked up their ears to listen. Gu Zian was worthy of being called an expert. He only needed to concentrate for a moment before he could tell which zither was being played by which person. The first group performed well. They were indeed playing according to his instructions. At the beginning, there was a bit of a flaw, but after playing a few notes, they became more and more in sync. The melody was grand, almost lifting the roof of the ship. Such a big and loud zither. It should be enough to suppress the red-clothed evildoer's zither, right? They had not heard the red-clothed evildoer's zither until now. Could it be that it was suppressed? Gu Zian had not finished thinking when a clear and bright zither sound slowly came out, directly drilling into everyone's ears. This zither sound did not sound arrogant. It was even a bit soft, but it was like lightning pushing through the clouds, so clear, so bright. Not to mention the people inside the cabin. Even the people outside felt their heartstrings being pulled when they heard this zither sound. It skipped a few beats. Needless to say, this completely different Guqin sound was played by Shui Ilan. The Guqin sounds of those 8 people could not suppress him at all. After the sound of the zither reverberated for a few beats, the rhythm of the other zither sounds was obviously disrupted. The harmony was broken, and some of the zither sounds actually changed their tune, unknowingly following Shui Ilan's zither sounds. After a few more tunes, 2 more zither followed. After a short while, 6 of the 8 zither began to follow Shui Ilan's tune. The other 2 couldn't hold on any longer and finally followed. The expressions of the people who had been listening outside changed greatly. Some of the more impatient ones simply shouted outside, wanting to remind their companions inside. Anyway, Shui Ilan didn't forbid it. The crowd outside began to clamor, each voice louder than the last. The sound of the Guqin inside had already become a harmonious 9-piece, like the roaring of the Yangtze River. And Shui Ilan's zither sound was always in a dominant position, like a phoenix leading the chirping of 100 birds, flying straight to the 9 heavens. Everyone's throats were almost hoarse from shouting, but they still could not suppress the sound of the zither, nor could they wake up the people inside who were playing the zither. Stop! Gu Zian suddenly shouted, successfully stopping everyone's blind shouting. Everyone turned to look at him. He took a breath and made a gesture, asking everyone to gather around him. Chapter 496. He lowered his voice and said in a voice that only the people around him could hear, "His music can bewitch people's hearts and affect the mind of the person playing the zither. We must think of other ways." Other ways? Everyone looked at each other and couldn't think of any way. Yifeng said from the side, "Just don't listen to his music." Everyone was stunned and immediately came over. Yes, don't listen to him. These people usually listen to the sound of the zither and subconsciously distinguish the quality of the other party's music. Unexpectedly, they didn't think of covering their ears and not listening to the other party's music. The people in the second group immediately agreed on the music they were going to play together, and then they tore the corners of their clothes and prepared to go in and play with cloth balls in their ears. If they don't listen to the other party's music, they won't be led away by the other party. After about 7 or 8 minutes, the sound of the zither finally stopped. There was a dead silence in the cabin. The people outside also held their breath. What happened to the people inside? Why was there no movement at all? Even if they were killed, at least one or two of the 8 people would scream, right? But no. After the zither stopped, there was no sound in the cabin. It was like a tomb of the living dead. Nervous, unprecedented nervous. This kind of fear in the face of the unknown made people even more nervous. Rong Yan's pretty face was pale and full of cold sweat. Her small hand pulled Gu Xian's lapel, as if she wanted to get some strength from him to support herself. Although Gu Xian was calm, his forehead was also dripping with cold sweat. He was also afraid and nervous. But he was now the backbone of everyone. He couldn't lose his mind. He couldn't help but look at Yin Ziyuan. He saw her slender body standing straight like a lonely pine tree. She was also a weak woman. At this moment, she didn't rely on anyone. In his impression, this young lady was arrogant and high-profile. Her mouth was unforgiving, and she looked down on ordinary people. But in front of him, she liked to make a fuss about nothing. From time to time, she would find an excuse to throw herself at him, wanting to have physical contact with him. After knowing him for less than 2 months, she confessed to him and bluntly said that she liked him. Her boldness almost made him tongue-tied. Moreover, because of his first impression, he didn't have a good impression of her. Her boldness was no different from indulgence in his eyes, so after being her zither player for a few months, he finally stopped. He thought that he hated her. In order to completely cut off her thoughts, he even let Rong Yin stay by his side, making her think that he already had a sweetheart. In the end, Yin Ziyuan backed off and stopped pestering him. He suddenly realized that without her chattering by his side, his surroundings seemed to have become much emptier, and his heart seemed to have lost a corner. He couldn't figure out what he was thinking about her. He seemed to be annoyed by her, but he also wanted to see her. Seeing her misbehaving, he couldn't help but stab her with his words. He thought that he liked a gentle and virtuous woman like Rong Yin, but his heart couldn't help but lean towards that woman. He had always felt that she had a lot of flaws, and compared to her looks, they were like heaven and earth. But at this moment, he suddenly realized that this girl was actually very open and aboveboard. She dared to love and hate, and she didn't like to rely on men like ordinary girls. At this critical moment, she was calmer than many men. She stood there in her red dress, like a bunch of fire, igniting his eyes and attracting his gaze. Chapter 497. At this moment, Gu Ziyan actually hoped that she would come close to him and hold his sleeves like Rong Yin, and lean on him like before. However, she didn't even want to come close to him, let alone hold his sleeves. Gu Ziyan had intentionally or unintentionally moved a few steps closer to her, but she only raised her head to look at him, and then very sensibly avoided him. She was standing quite close to her shadow guard. Yifeng was like a silent mountain, but also like an unsheathed sword, standing beside Yin Ziyuan, steady, reliable, and giving people strength for no reason. At such a critical moment, he became Yin Ziyuan's guardian, not allowing anyone to slight him. As if he felt Gu Ziyan's gaze, Yifeng swept a glance at him. Such a sharp and indifferent glance actually made Gu Ziyan's heart inexplicably tremble, and his fingers lightly clenched. Gu Ziyan was distracted for a moment, and actually didn't notice when the second wave of people went in. When he came back to his senses, the second wave of people had already started playing the guqin. The second wave of people went in with their ears covered, so they couldn't hear each other's guqin, and only relied on hand gestures to play their own guqin. Because of this, the tunes played by the 8 guqin were slightly disharmonious. Fortunately, it didn't affect the overall situation, and the sound was loud enough. Shuilan's guqin sounded again. After a moment, the faces of the nervous people outside changed again. The 8 people who just went in with their ears covered, and obviously shouldn't have heard the other party's guqin, but now they actually started to play along with Shuilan's tune. After 3 to 4 minutes, the guqin inside had completely harmonized, and just like the first wave of people, they completely followed the other party's guqin. No one could escape this fate. Could it be that the cloth in their ears was removed when they went in? The hearts of the people outside were as heavy as lead, and their faces were ashen. Needless to say, the The second wave of people was about to be defeated, and the first wave of people still didn't come out, so they didn't know what happened. If this went on, everyone's fate would be worrying. Most likely, none of them would be able to escape death. With the Grim Reaper's scythe above their heads, naturally everyone was frightened. The excessive tension made several women, including Rong Yin, cry, and 2 even fainted. Yin Ziyuan was also afraid, but what was the use of being afraid now? What's the use of crying? It was easier to make people confused and infected them with pessimism. Yin Ziyuan said in a low voice, "Why are you crying? At worst, he would just die. Shut up, all of you. Yifeng, if anyone cries again, I'll throw them into the lake to feed the monsters." All right. Yifeng agreed without hesitation, his gaze sweeping over the few crying women. This kind of threat was more effective than any kind of consolation. The women shuddered, and as expected, they stopped crying and choked back their sobs. The other men present couldn't help but look at Yin Ziyuan with admiration in their eyes. Ziyangij, you see, at this time she still doesn't forget to bully people. Rong Yin pulled Gu Ziyan's sleeve and couldn't help but want to complain. Gu Ziyan pulled back his sleeve, looked sideways at Rong Yin, and said in a cold voice, "If bullying people can make you shut up and not cry, I will also bully people." This sentence made Rong Yan's face pale, and she didn't dare to speak again. Yin Ziyuan didn't expect Gu Ziyan to speak for her at this time, and couldn't help but glance at him. Gu Ziyan was also looking at her. Chapter 498. It just so happened that Gu Ziyan was also looking at her. When their gazes met, Yin Ziyuan immediately turned her head to look at the water in the distance. It was already a foregone conclusion that the second wave would lose. They had to make preparations for the third wave. Yifeng suddenly took a step forward. "Excuse me." A faint silver light flashed between his fingers and flashed in front of the third wave. His figure was as fast as a ghost, and his technique was even faster. Everyone was caught off guard, and they all fell into his trap. Everyone felt a pain in their ears and a buzzing sound. They couldn't hear anything. "You, what are you doing?" The 8 people cried out. Yifeng used his fingertips to write a few words on the boat with water. "I stabbed your acupoints that caused deafness. You will be deaf for a day, and then you will recover." Only then did everyone come to a realization. Gu Ziyan looked at Yifeng with admiration. At this time, it was indeed better to be deaf than not. Moreover, it was just being deaf for a day. It was worth it to be deaf for a day in exchange for victory. Time was of the essence. Gu Ziyan also used water to write down the things they needed to pay attention to. The 8 people nodded in agreement. Because some of them had poor mental fortitude and were so scared that they couldn't hold the zither properly, Gu Ziyan swapped out 2 people at the last minute. In addition to the 2 people who had fainted from fright, the original 4 substitutes were also arranged. Soon, the third group of people also entered the cabin with their hearts in their mouths. This was the last method they could think of. If even this failed, they might not have a chance to win anymore. Nervous, unprecedentedly nervous. The air outside the cabin was so heavy that it seemed to freeze. Even 1 minute seemed to be extremely long. The people who went in were already deaf. It was impossible for them to hear the sound of the red-clothed evildoer's zither. It was impossible for them to follow the sound of the zither, right? Yin Ziyuan clenched her hands tightly. Her palms were covered in cold sweat. Suddenly, her small hands were grabbed by a large hand. "I'm here. Don't be afraid." The voice was steady and gave her strength for no reason. Yin Ziyuan turned around and saw Yifeng's dark eyes. Yin Ziyuan stared blankly for a moment and suddenly felt a lot more at ease. She nodded slightly, as if to say to him, but also as if to encourage herself, "We will survive." That's right. Most of the people present were young. They were at the age where flowers were about to bloom. Who would be willing to die silently here? 5 minutes later, the few people waiting outside finally lost all hope. The third wave of people had clearly been deafened, but they only lasted for 2 to 3 minutes. Then, she once again followed Shui Ilan's music. Gu Ziyan's face was ashen. At this point, he was already in despair and couldn't think of any other good ideas. When the third wave of people finished playing, Shui Ilan urged for the fourth wave of people. Another person fainted from fright. The final group had 7 people. 7 people couldn't meet Shui Ilan's requirements. According to Shui Ilan's words, if the fourth wave of people couldn't be gathered, he would simply take their lives. Yifeng suddenly rushed forward and picked up the zither of a fainted person. He simply said, "I'll do it." Gu Ziyan looked at him in shock. "You know how to play?" Yifeng didn't answer his question. Instead, he walked in with large strides. Gu Ziyan and the others could only follow. This was already the last wave of people. Yin Ziyuan finally saw the layout of the cabin. Shui Ilan was sitting in the middle in red clothes. Chapter 499. Shui Ilan had a blue zither on his lap, and the other people who came in earlier were nowhere to be seen. In the corner of the cabin, there was only Ning Shuema sitting on a chair. She was also wearing a red robe, and her sitting posture was a bit strange. It was like she was stiff and didn't move at all. Only her eyes were slightly lowered, and her eyelashes would occasionally flutter a few times. Because she had fallen into the water, Ning Shuema's makeup had been completely washed off, and her original appearance was revealed. Her face was as white as jade, her eyes were watery, her nose was high, and her lips were cherry red. It was like the rough outer layer of a gem had been polished off, and the resplendent inside was finally revealed. She was extremely beautiful, so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off her. Ning Shuema's face was a bit pale. When she saw Yin Ziyuan and the others come in, her eyes flashed with sadness, and she looked at Shui Ilan with hatred. Yin Ziyuan's eyes looked at Ning Shuema's face, and she pursed her lips. Her eyes flashed with sadness. Shui, everything you showed me was fake. She had treated her as a real friend. But not only was her name fake, even her face was fake. Ning Shuema's mute acupuncture point had been sealed and she couldn't speak. This short half an hour was definitely the biggest nightmare of her life. She sat there like a puppet, staring blankly at the living people coming in one by one. According to Shui Ilan's request, each of them sat in a position to play the zither. She could clearly see the fear and struggle in their eyes. She watched as they played the zither with all their might. She watched as they couldn't get rid of Shui Ilan's zither music. She watched as strands of vital qi flowed towards the zither on Shui Ilan's lap. She watched as a string on the zither appeared from nothing. She watched as those people's black hair turned white and the youths in their prime turned into old people with wrinkled skin and white hair. Every time Shui Ilan's last note fell, those people would fall to the ground one after another as if all their energy had been sucked out of them, dying silently. In the end, Shui Ilan waved his sleeve and threw the corpses out of the window. She didn't know what method he used, but when the corpses fell into the water, there was no sound at all. She couldn't hear the sound of them falling into the water. Just like that, she watched as wave after wave of people came in and repeated the same path. Just now, these people were still talking and laughing. They were even in high spirits as they played with their true abilities. She had even commented on a few of them. She even had the banknotes they gave her. Although Ning Shuema was used to seeing life and death, the repeated scenes of the flower-like young man's life still shocked her to the core, almost making her want to vomit. She didn't know what method Shui Ilan had used on her, but she could hear the other people's zither music and their voices, but she couldn't hear his. She originally wanted to find a flaw in Shui Ilan's zither music to warn the people who came in later. But she couldn't hear his zither music at all, so naturally she couldn't tell if his zither music was lacking. Now that she saw Yin Ziyuan come in, thinking about the lives of those young men and women, Ning Shuema's heart became even more anxious. She had to think of a way to stop it. Otherwise, once the zither music started, Yin Ziyuan and the others would be like the others, and their lives would instantly wither away. But she couldn't even move right now. She couldn't even open her mouth to speak, so how could she stop all of this? Her gaze turned and fell onto Yifeng. Chapter 500. Coincidentally, Yifeng also glanced at her. Their eyes met. Ning Shuema blinked, then looked at herself, then at Yifeng, and then at herself. Yifeng seemed to be slightly taken aback, and then he seemed to have understood something. He did not speak, still standing beside Yin Ziyuan. Where are the others? Rong Yin could not help but ask. The layout of this place was clear at a glance. She could not see the shadows of the original group of people who came in. Shui Ilan sat there, plucking the strings with his fingers. His smile was like a trickling spring. Guess? Rong Yin was dazed by his smile. She knew that the person in front of her was a demon who killed without blinking, but she was still fascinated by his smile. Her mind was in a trance for a moment. I can't guess. Since you can't guess, then don't guess. Shui Ilan's voice was as warm as the spring breeze. I will count to 10, and each of you will sit in a position. I don't seem to be very patient. If you can't do it, I will be sorry to everyone. Everyone? There were 8 praying mats placed around Shui Ilan, and they happened to be in 8 positions. Could it be that there was something strange about his praying mats? At this time, no one dared to be negligent, and each of them chose a direction and walked over. Shui Ilan's counting voice was very leisurely, and his speed was also quite fast. Soon, everyone found their positions. A few of the more scheming people did not sit on the praying mats, but directly sat on the ground. Shui Ilan glanced at those people lightly, but did not say anything. Rong Yin liked to be clean, so she even used her sleeve to brush the praying mat. She was about to sit down when she suddenly felt a sudden numbness in her leg. She was already very nervous, so when she was suddenly hit, she sat down with a thump and instantly screamed. Her cry was shrill, and her voice was not soft, so it immediately attracted everyone's attention. Even Shui Ilan glanced in her direction. It was also at this moment that Yifeng, who had already approached Ning Xuema, arrived beside Ning Xuema like a bolt of lightning. The longsword in his hand was unsheathed and pressed against Ning Xuema's back. By the time Shui Ilan noticed, Yifeng had already succeeded. The position he was standing at was extremely tricky. His entire body was hidden behind Ning Xuema. His sword was sharp. As long as he breathed in and out slightly, he could directly stab into Ning Xuema's back. Shui Ilan narrowed his eyes and looked at Yifeng lazily. What are you doing? Let us go. Otherwise, I'll kill her. Yifeng's goal was clear. Obviously, no one had expected this sudden change. Everyone held their breaths, not knowing how things would develop. Ning Xuema sighed in relief. Just now, she had looked at Yifeng as if her eyes were cramping. In fact, this was what she meant. She thought that this cold blockhead didn't understand, but it turned out that he didn't move at all. This child is teachable. This child is teachable. Ning Xuema also looked at Shui Ilan. She never thought that Shui Ilan would have feelings for her. She always felt that this bastard kept her alive for some other purpose and wouldn't let her die so easily. Shui Ilan laughed. You want to use her to threaten me? Do you think she's qualified? Yifeng's voice was calm. Whether she's qualified or not, we'll only know after we try. This is our only chance. If you defeat me, you still have a chance. Now that you're acting like this, you've angered me. I don't want to give you the only chance anymore. Chapter 501. As soon as these words came out, everyone's face changed. Originally, they wanted to use their zither skills to make a final gamble, but now that they have angered this evildoer, their only chance will be lost. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Although Ning Xuema couldn't move or speak, she could still see everyone's expression. She clearly saw their expressions and her heart sank. She inwardly cursed, "This is bad. If these people are not united, this red-clothed evildoer will definitely take advantage of their weakness. This bastard is best at psychological attacks." Sure enough, Shui Ilan's gaze swept across the crowd. Smiling slightly, he said, "This person has destroyed your only chance to fight for your life. What do you want to do?" Everyone looked at each other, but no one spoke. "Seeing that you are not accomplices, this lord can give you a chance. Let him stop this stupid act. Otherwise, this lord will directly send you to feed the monsters." At this moment, Rong Yin had already climbed up from the ground. She also understood that the reason why she fell down just now was because of Yifeng's mischief. He borrowed her scream to attract Shui Yilan's attention so that he could carry out his plan of attack. He succeeded, but they were all screwed. Is this red-clothed evildoer a person who is easily threatened? What is Ning Shuema? Will this red-clothed evildoer really put her in his heart? Yifeng's actions are useless. It will only anger this red-clothed evildoer and make the situation worse. Rong Yin couldn't help but open her mouth, but she was angry at Yin Ziyuan. Yin Ziyuan, take care of your bodyguard. Don't let him do stupid things. Yin Ziyuan's face was also pale, looking at Ning Shuema and then looking at Yifeng. Yifeng, don't. Although Ning Shuema did not tell her a lot of things, but in her heart, she has always treated Ning Shuema as a friend. Her own bodyguard threatening her friend. This made her a little embarrassed. Yifeng's face was cold. Miss Yin, this woman did not harm you enough? They are in cahoots. The treasured sword moved slightly forward. Ning Shuema's clothes were thin to begin with, so when the tip of his sword moved slightly, blood seeped out from her back. Ning Shuema groaned in a low voice as she furrowed her brows. Shui Yilan's eyes darkened, and he suddenly reached out his hand. Yin Ziyuan screamed and threw herself into Shui Yilan's arms. Two cold fingers pinched Yin Ziyuan's throat. Shui Yilan chuckled. Aren't you risking your life to save her? I might as well kill her first. Yin Ziyuan's pretty face flushed red when he exerted a little force with his fingers. She couldn't even breathe properly. I'll count to 3. If you continue to be stubborn, I'll kill her directly. 1. Yifeng's face changed slightly, but he did not back down. If you don't agree to my conditions, I'll kill your accomplice. 1, 2, He counted even faster than Shui Yilan. Shui Yilan. This was the first time he met someone who dared to challenge him like this. You can kill that girl, but I'll make all of you accompany her in death. Shui Yilan's voice was cold. If I let her go, we will really die without a burial ground. Yifeng's voice was as calm as iron. Rather than that, I might as well take a gamble. Maybe I can fight for a chance of survival. Even if I die in the end, I won't lose anything if I can drag your concubine down with me. This Yifeng was indeed calm and smart. He could see the situation clearly. Was this person really an ordinary shadow guard? Chapter 502. Ning Shuema gave him a thumbs up in her heart. If she was in Yifeng's position, she would probably do the same. Shui Yilan narrowed his eyes. Aren't you afraid of angering me and killing her now? Don't you like her? Are you willing to let her die like this? His fingers tightened around Yin Ziyuan's throat, causing her small face to turn green. Yifeng narrowed his eyes slightly and said coldly, She's just my master. You think too much. If I let you go, we will all die, and so will she. What's the difference between now and then? This young man is so calm that it's scary. Shui Yilan's eyes darkened. If she dies in my hands like this, won't you regret it? No. I want to protect the lives of the majority of people and myself. If she dies and I escape with my life, I will report to her father and give her a good coffin. Shui Yilan smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. So you are even more ruthless than me. I am a fugitive. Being ruthless is my nature. Yifeng's voice was like ice. It was obvious that he was ready to risk everything. A fugitive's patience is limited. Your Excellency, do you agree to this condition of mine? The sword in his hand slightly moved forward, causing more blood to flow out from Ning Shuema's back. It had already begun to drip onto the floor. Good. I like people like you who are ruthless. I agree. Shui Yilan suddenly let go of Yin Ziyuan. Yin Ziyuan had been holding her breath for a long time. Her face was already green. Now that she was free, she immediately gasped for air. She staggered a few steps and almost fell. An arm from the side supported her. Ziyuan, are you okay? Yin Ziyuan could only focus on gasping for air. She could not speak for a while. She could only shake her head. Her eyes were fixed on Yifeng's face, as if it was the first time she had met him. Gu Ziyan held her arm. When he saw her expression, his expression changed slightly. It was Gu Ziyan who was supporting her, but her eyes and thoughts were not on him. Once again, He was truly close to this delicate body. Unexpectedly, he felt very touched and a very warm feeling welled up in his heart. In his heart, there was a kind of happiness that he had lost and then regained. Ziyuan, your neck is injured. I have some medicine here. Gu Ziyan helped her sit down. There was a bruise on her neck, and she had to apply some medicine to prevent the bruise from spreading. Ziyangij. Rong Yin didn't expect that Gu Ziyan would care about Yin Ziyuan. She was very dissatisfied and couldn't help but call out. Gu Ziyan ignored her. He took out some Jinchuang ointment and applied it on her wound. Yin Ziyuan's soul seemed to have been squeezed out by Shuilan. Her beautiful face was pale, and she seemed to have lost her soul. On the other side, Shuilan clapped his hands and looked at Yifeng unkindly. I have already agreed to your conditions. Why are you still not letting her go? Yifeng said, Your Excellency, make an oath in front of the devil ancestor. If I let her go, you will never find trouble with us again and take our lives. Ning Xuema was speechless. It seemed that this Yifeng knew a lot. He also knew that Shuilan was a demon. Shuilan's face sank. Yifeng, you have guts. Yifeng didn't say anything, but his expression showed that he wasn't willing to take a step back. Shuilan's gaze turned to Ning Xuema's small face. Ning Xuema's small face was pale, and she was also looking at him. When their eyes met, Ning Xuema actually smiled. Shuilan didn't know what she was smiling about, but he faintly felt that she was up to no good. Chapter 503. Shuilan squinted his eyes and smiled. Isn't it just swearing in front of the devil ancestor? It's not difficult at all. He swore. After he finished, Yifeng apologized and let go of Ning Xuema. Shuilan's sleeves shook, rolling Ning Xuema into his embrace. His left arm wrapped around her, and he gritted his teeth beside her ear. You little bastard who only cares about outsiders. Aren't you afraid that he will kill you? Ning Xuema's acupuncture points were still sealed. She just blinked her eyes and couldn't speak. She didn't have any other reaction. She knew that Yifeng wouldn't really kill her. As for Yifeng taking her as a hostage, it was also her who secretly hinted him with her eyes. However, she didn't expect Shuilan to agree so quickly. It seemed like he was really afraid that she would die. Yifeng finally heaved a sigh of relief. He had taken a risk to block her. Not bad. He had won. He had finally won a chance to live for all the survivors. His gaze fell on Yin Ziyuan again. He saw that she was half leaning in Gu Ziyan's arms. Her face was still pale, and her eyes were dark and unfocused. It seemed like she hadn't come back to her senses. His eyes showed a hint of guilt. When he was about to go forward to take a look, he suddenly heard Shuilan chuckling. You are lucky this time. Even if I don't kill you, do you think you can escape alive? Before his laughter stopped, he had already floated up like a red cloud and smashed the roof of the ship. Everyone was shocked. Before they could react, they suddenly heard Yifeng let out a muffled groan. He staggered 2 steps and fell on the floor with a plop. Shuilan's laughter came from above the hole in the cabin. I hate being threatened the most. Let me teach you a lesson. His laughter faded and he was already far away. Yifeng lay there. He felt that his internal organs were in so much pain that they were about to flip over. Cold sweat dripped down from his forehead. He couldn't get up and could only lie there gasping for breath. A pair of embroidered shoes stopped in front of his eyes. His body stiffened, and he slowly raised his head to meet Yin Ziyuan's ink-black eyes. She looked down at him. How are you? Yifeng lowered his eyes and said in a cold voice, It's just a small injury. He won't die. Won't die? Ha, how can a person like you die? Yin Ziyuan sneered. She slowly squatted down and looked into his eyes. She stubbornly wanted an answer. Did you really not care about my safety just now? If I die, will you really only prepare a coffin for me? Ziyuan, now that we're out of danger, don't ask anymore. He was also in a hurry and had no other choice. After all, we're out of danger, aren't we? Someone tried to persuade him. Shut up. Yin Ziyuan fiercely replied to that person. She turned her head to look at Yifeng as if she wouldn't give up until she got a clear answer. Answer me. Yi Feng's body stiffened. He lowered his eyes and only replied with one word, yes, Pa. His face received a fierce slap. Yi Feng, you're only a hidden guard. I'm the master and you're the servant. What right do you have to decide my life or death? Half of Yi Feng's face was burning. He lowered his eyes and pursed his lips without replying. Yi Feng, I've always hated you. Do you know that? Yan Ziyuan's large eyes seemed to be burning with fire. I know. Yi Feng slightly closed his eyes. Haha, it's good that you know. Let me tell you, I hate you even more now. When we get home, I'll tell father to remove you from your position as a hidden guard. Yi Feng's face became even paler. After pausing for a moment, he replied with 2 words, do as you wish. Yin Ziyuan, she felt an inexplicable fire in her chest rush up. She couldn't help reaching out to push Yi Feng. Go die. I don't want you anymore. Chapter 504. She was quite strong, but she couldn't move Yi Feng at all. She got up in a fit of anger and walked out of the cabin. When she reached the cabin door, she tripped over the high threshold and almost fell out. Be careful. Gu Ziyan supported her from the side. Yin Ziyuan steadied herself and looked at Gu Ziyan, who was beside her. He was still as handsome as before and was no longer cold to her. He had even started to take care of her. This was supposed to be a happy occasion for her, but why did she still want to cry? She turned around and looked coldly at Yi Feng, who was still lying there, before turning around and walking out. The others also didn't want to stay in the cabin. They felt that there was a gloomy ghost aura here, so they all walked out to see if the illusion outside had been broken or not. Yi Feng was the only one left in the spacious cabin. He was lying there alone. Only when everyone had left did he start to pant heavily. He slowly stretched out his hand. His originally pale palm was now pitch black. It was obvious that he had been poisoned. There was no need to ask. It was Xue Elon who had plotted against him before he left. The corners of his lips twitched and he closed his eyes again. Even if Yin Ziyuan didn't chase him away, he wouldn't be able to stay by her side. Ah Yuan, take care. I didn't think that you and I would still not be fated in this life. Outside the cabin, everyone looked at the rolling river below and felt helpless. That demonic red-clothed evildoer had already left. Why was the scenery still the same? The fog was still very thick. They couldn't see the road ahead, and there were still monsters appearing underwater. Could it be that this wasn't an illusion, but reality? Then where was this place? What kind of method did that freak use to move such a large ship from the lake to here without anyone noticing? How were they going to leave this place? The survivors were all at a loss. They didn't know what to do. Yin Ziyuan was in a daze for a moment. She suddenly turned around and walked into the cabin. Ziyuan, where are you going? Gu Ziyan followed beside her. Yi Feng seems to know something. Let's ask him what's going on. Yin Ziyuan gave an honorable reason. Finally, they returned to the cabin. However, when he entered, he did not see Yi Feng, who was supposed to be lying there. The entire hall was empty. What's going on? Yin Ziyuan circled the entire hall and the rear cabin like a whirlwind, but she still couldn't find Yi Feng's shadow. She and Gu Ziyan looked at each other. Gu Ziyan said, he might have followed them out. Let's go out and look for him. They were now on a ship surrounded by water. Yi Feng couldn't have left quietly. 5 minutes later, Yin Ziyuan leaned against a mast. He left. He really left. She had already looked through every nook and cranny of the ship, but she still couldn't find Yi Feng's shadow. Although she couldn't see him before, she knew in her heart that he was here. No matter where she went, he would be there. It was just that he was hiding in a place where he was supposed to be. Once she was in real danger, he would appear in time and easily rescue her from danger, keeping her away from danger. Or he would silently guard her side, blocking any disaster for her. But now, she understood in her heart that he had really left. He had abandoned his master and would never come back. Gu Ziyan silently stood by Yin Ziyuan's side. This was the first time he had seen her so weak and helpless. Chapter 505. Gu Ziyan's heart twisted, patting her hand. Ziyuan, don't be afraid. I won't abandon you. Rong Yin also stood beside her, holding Gu Ziyan's arm, smiling at Yin Ziyuan. Ziyuan, we will advance and retreat together with you. We won't abandon you. Gu Ziyan slightly frowned, and was about to quietly brush off Rong Yan's hand, when Yin Ziyuan pulled her hand out of Gu Ziyan's palm. Forcing herself to be spirited, she nodded at the two of them. We are now grasshoppers on the same rope. No one can escape. Let me calm down first. Let me think of a way to leave this place. She turned and walked a few steps, leaning against another pillar. Looking up at the dusky sky. The sky was covered with dense clouds. No stars, no moon, and the surroundings were dim, just like her chaotic state of mind at the moment. The few survivors discussed and discussed, using all kinds of methods they knew, but still couldn't solve this maze, unable to leave this dangerous place. Because the boatman was basically dead, in the end, they had to control the boat themselves. Randomly choosing a direction, they slowly moved forward. After all, the evildoer had already left. Perhaps they could break through the maze by moving the boat a few miles. These people usually lived like princes. Playing the zither was an expert, but when it came to controlling a boat, they were rookies. After a long time of hard work, everyone's hands were full of bloody blisters, but they finally grasped the knack of it. Finally, the boat started to move after swaying from side to side. About 10 minutes later, the crowd suddenly heard a cracking sound from the bottom of the boat. It was like the sound of wood cracking. Yin Ziyuan was numbly paddling the oars, her thoughts drifting away. So when she heard the strange cracking sound, she didn't think much about it, until she heard someone shout, "Not good. The bottom of the boat is cracking. Water is entering." In a rush, panic, everyone tried to think of a way to stop the boat from cracking. Seeing the water crazily rushing in, they were afraid of being swept into the water, so they could only choose to jump off the boat. Yin Ziyuan's swimming skill was average, but fortunately she jumped into the water in time, desperately swimming away from the boat, and then watched the boat capsize, slowly sinking to the bottom. Yin Ziyuan looked around. Like her, there were only 3 people floating on the water: Gu Ziyan, Rong Yin, and Master Luo. The others were nowhere to be seen. She didn't know if they were swept into the water or eaten by some monster. Gu Ziyan's martial arts is quite good. Rong's can't swim, her whole body almost hanging on his arm, but he's still swimming not slow. Seeing Yin Ziyuan, he heaved a sigh of relief and swam over with Rong Yin. "Ziyuan, are you all right?" Yin Ziyuan shook her head. "I'm fine." She couldn't help but look around. She was already in such a dangerous situation, yet Yi Feng still had no intention of appearing. "Humph, if you don't want to come out, then don't come out. I don't care about you. When I go back, I'll ask my father to send me a better shadow guard. I don't want you anymore." Yin Ziyuan's heart was ruthless. But why does my heart always hurt so much? The 4 of them gathered together and had a simple discussion. Then, they chose a direction and swam forward together. The fog was boundless. The sky was filled with dark clouds, and the water under them was yellow and dirty. The waves came one after another, hitting their body. It was very cold. At this moment, they were sure that they were not in the lake. How can the lake be so turbid? Chapter 506. Behind them came the faint roar of the aquatic monster, which made everyone's heart skip a beat. They were no stranger to this kind of roar. After all, they had heard it for most of the night. They had also seen with their own eyes several experts who fell into the water and were directly torn apart by this kind of monster. But it was strange. Although they had heard this kind of monsters roar several times, they did not see them chasing after them. It seemed that they were blocked by something. Not far behind them came the sound of fierce splashing of water, as if in that place, the monsters were fighting with something. Yin Ziyuan's heart slightly moved. She could not help but look back, but the sky was dark. She could not see anything clearly. Could it be Yi Feng who was blocking the monsters behind them? Yin Ziyuan almost could not help but swim back to take a look. Ka! Suddenly, a flash of lightning appeared in the horizon. illuminating the surroundings in a flash. Almost at the same time, Yin Ziyuan heard a strange, muffled cry. She saw a huge fishtail not far behind her. Its scales were sparkling, and there was a huge wound on the fishtail. Blood was flowing out from the wound. The lightning flashed and disappeared. The surroundings fell into darkness, and there was a loud sound of something falling into the water. Ziyuan, don't look. Quickly go. Gu Ziyan grabbed her arm and swam forward with her. Did you see that fishtail? Yin Ziyuan's heart was beating wildly. She felt that the fishtail was vaguely familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen it. I saw it. It should also be a monster. Quickly go. Quickly go. Behind them, the splashing of water became more violent. It was obvious that the battle between the monsters was more intense. The four of them did not dare to look back. They could only desperately swim forward. Woo! Behind them came a long, mournful cry. Although the sound was mournful, it was not unpleasant to hear. It echoed in everyone's ears. Ka! Another flash of lightning struck. Yin Ziyuan could not help but look back again. She did not see the beautiful fishtail, but saw two black dorsal fins rushing towards their direction like arrows. The monster is coming. Rong Yin screamed, Brother Ziyan, I don't want to die. I don't want to die, wah. She broke down and burst into tears. Shut up. If you cry again, I'll leave you behind. Gu Ziyan was already nervous. Now that she was crying, he had a headache. He was actually very good at swimming, but now that he was dragging two people, his speed was more than half of his usual speed. Seeing the ink-black dorsal fin getting closer and closer, Rong Yin was scared out of her wits. She couldn't help but shout, Brother Ziyan, you can't drag two people with you. Like this, none of us can escape. She was implying that Gu Ziyan should throw away Yin Ziyuan. Gu Ziyan's face was pale. Rong Yin was the daughter of his savior. He promised that person that he would take care of her for the rest of her life. So as long as he didn't die, he couldn't abandon her. As for Yin Ziyuan, he had just understood his feelings, so how could he bear to abandon her? Yin Ziyuan's swimming was average. She could barely support herself. She looked back at the monster's dorsal fin that was getting closer and closer, and then looked at Gu Ziyan who was dragging her. She pursed her red lips and suddenly let go. She broke free from Gu Ziyan's arm and shouted, You take her away first. Gu Ziyan was shocked and reached out to pull her. Yin Ziyuan swam desperately to the side. Don't worry about me. I can swim by myself. Chapter 507. In just a moment, Yin Ziyuan was already 3 to 4 feet away from Gu Ziyan and Rong Yin. Brother Ziyan, let's go, let's go. She can swim by herself. If we delay any longer, we will all die. Woo-woo, I don't want to die. Rong Yin cried beside Gu Ziyan. Gu Ziyan choked. If he tried to pull Yin Ziyuan, he was afraid that it would be too late. While he was distracted, Yin Ziyuan had already disappeared into the darkness and could no longer be seen. Ziyuan, Ziyuan, he couldn't help but shout. At this moment, Gu Ziyan seemed to have lost his soul. Gu Ziyan wanted to chase after her, but he lost sight of her. For a moment, he didn't know which direction to go. The monster is coming. Rong Yan's voice changed. Let's go. Let's go. Gu Ziyan sighed. He could only swim forward with all his might. Yin Ziyuan swam forward aimlessly. The lightning in the sky was getting denser and denser. One after another, it lit up the surroundings. She saw that Gu Ziyan and Rong Yin were only 2 black dots. She also saw that the monster first caught up with young Master Zhao. Poor young Master Zhao didn't even have time to scream before he was dragged into the water, never to come up again. After a moment, the 2 dorsal fins chased in her direction, getting closer and closer. She knew that she was finished. Although her martial arts were not low, but compared to young Master Zhao, she was still lacking. Even he didn't have the strength to fight back. How could she? Being eaten was only a matter of moments. Yin Ziyuan's heart was in despair. She simply stopped swimming and closed her eyes slightly. Yifeng, you don't care about me anymore. I'm going to die, buried in the belly of a fish. You don't even have to prepare a coffin for me. The black dorsal fins were getting closer and closer, so close that she could clearly see the sharp teeth in their mouths. With a splash of water, her legs were forcefully pushed open, as if she was riding on something. She was shocked and subconsciously looked down, only to find that she was riding on the back of a big fish. The dark blue crystal fish scales were under her. Almost instinctively, she hugged the fish's body, and the big fish carried her forward quickly. This scene was simply like a dream. When the big fish scuttled close to the surface of the water, it brought up waves that splashed onto her face, making her unable to open her eyes. She could only desperately lie on its body, tightly hugging the fins on its back. In a daze, only one thought flashed through her mind. There was actually a fish that came to save her. She had actually encountered a plot that would only appear in a legendary novel. The sound of water was deafening. She couldn't hear or see anything. She just hugged it with all her might. She didn't notice that the dark clouds in the originally dark sky above her head had dispersed, and she didn't notice that the big fish below her had slowed down and finally stopped. Master, there is really a Charmin. I didn't expect that there would be a Charmin in the chaotic river. Ah, it's carrying a person on its back. A voice suddenly sounded in front of her. The voice was crisp and pleasant, but very unfamiliar. Yin Ziyuan slowly raised her eyes dizzily. When she saw the person in front of her, she couldn't help but raise her hand to rub her eyes. Not far in front of her, there was a big bird suspended in the air, with blue satin feathers, a long vermilion beak, a phoenix feather crown, and a long tail feathers, Qing Luan, the legendary Qing Luan. On the back of Qing Luan stood two people. Chapter 508. One of the two was a 15 or 16-year-old girl with a delicate and pretty face. She should be the disciple. The other looked like a 20-year-old woman, but her dress was a bit strange. Ordinary women wore skirts, but she wore a white robe, an extremely wide white robe like snow. This white-robed woman's long hair was loose and flying behind her. The corners of her eyes were slightly raised, and her eyebrows were elegant and beautiful. However, she looked cold and unapproachable. She was very beautiful, as if she was a beauty carved out of snow. On this continent, there was no one else who could ride such an eye-catching divine bird. Only the leader of bright reverence religion, Yi Qingluan. Yin Ziyuan stared at her for a moment. Her heart was so nervous that it almost jumped out. She hurriedly saluted. Senior Yi. Yi Qingluan looked at her from above. To be exact, she was looking at the big fish under her body. Her eyes moved slightly. Sure enough, it's Sharkman. Soon after, Yin Ziyuan felt her body was as light as a feather, and she fell on the riverbank. The big fish under her body automatically left the water and flew towards Yi Qingluan's back. It was only at this moment that Yin Ziyuan saw clearly what the big fish that had been carrying her looked like. How was this a big fish? It was clearly a merman. It was the size of two adults. Its whole body was dark blue. Above its chest, it had the streamlined shape of a fish. Above its chest, it was a human. Its long blue algae-like hair was scattered all over its body, making Yin Ziyuan unable to see its face. There was a long wound on its tail, which was still dripping blood. A merman. A legendary merman. She didn't expect that the one who saved her life this time was actually such a beautiful merman. Her heart began to thump wildly. She turned over and was about to get up. Put him down. She always felt that this merman was the most important person to her. Unfortunately, she had seriously overdrawn her strength in the water. Just as she stood up, she fell down with a plop. There were sharp stones beneath her, and her leg was also injured. Yi Qingluan lightly glanced at her, raised her sleeve, and threw down a medicine bottle. Eat it. It can increase your power by 10 years. Consider it your reward. Her voice was also cold, with a chill like ice and snow. It made Yin Ziyuan's heart shrink. Yi Qingluan was obviously the kind of person who didn't talk to mortals. After she finished speaking, she patted the head of the blue Luan phoenix. The blue Luan phoenix flapped its wings and turned into a black in the sky. Her savior. No, her savior fish. Yin Ziyuan staggered 2 steps forward, then stopped dejectedly. Looking around, there were piles of rocks and gravel everywhere. Chaos River? 1,000 li away. She had heard of the chaotic river before. It was more than 1,000 miles away from Daliang City where she lived. She didn't expect that the merman would bring her here after a night of flying, thinking of Ning Shuema, who was kidnapped by the red-clothed evildoer, thinking of Yifeng, and then thinking of the merman who was taken away by Yi Qingluan. Yin Ziyuan only felt like a fire was burning in her heart. Ning Shuema would suffer greatly if she fell into the hands of the red-clothed pervert. Yifeng's life and death were unknown. As for the mermaid, no one knew what fate it would have if it fell into Yi Qingluan's hands. After all, the legendary mermaid's entire body was a treasure. The mermaid's tears were even rarer, and the mermaid's skin was said to be able to make people glow with youth and moisturize their skin. Yi Qingluan didn't take the merman away to skin it, right? Chapter 509. Yin Ziyuan quivered and shivered in fear. She kicked the bottle of medicine that Yi Qingluan had thrown far away. That Sharkman had saved her life and was already her friend. She would not accept this bottle of medicine and would not betray her friend. She picked a direction and ran. She wanted to get help. She wanted to find that Han Shanyue. However, the chaotic river was 2,000 miles away from the capital of Chongkong country. It would take her at least 3 days to get there. Would she be able to make it in time? Ning Shuema and Shui Ilan had known each other for a long time. She had finally seen how he displayed his martial arts. She only had a few words to comment on this. Damn it, he was indeed not human. This bastard carried her away from the ship and glided on the surface of the water. His sleeves fluttered like a fire lotus blooming in the dark night. From time to time, the heads of monsters would pop out from the turbid water, but the moment they saw him, they would avoid him. Shui Ilan's speed was too fast, and the surroundings were too dark. Ning Shuema, who was in his embrace, felt as if she was dancing on the edge of a cliff in the middle of the night. She was on tenterhooks, afraid that in the next moment, she would fall into an abyss or hit a huge rock, causing her to crash and die. His speed was at least 200 miles per hour, right? Even if they were on the highway, it was still seriously over the speed limit. Once they hit something, they would be smashed into pieces. What was worse was that he did not have any shelter. The hurricane in front of him made it hard for him to open his eyes. Even though Ning Shuema was nestled in his arms, the hurricane blew so hard that her skin felt like it was being torn apart. It was very painful, especially her injured back, which happened to be leaning against the wind. When the hurricane blew on her wound, it was as if there was a knife cutting into her body inch by inch. She was in so much pain that her face turned pale. Where the hell was this bastard taking her? Were the people on the ship really out of danger? This bastard didn't kill Yifeng in the end, right? Where did that little Qilin, who always dropped the ball at the most crucial moment, run off to? She originally had a telepathic connection with the little Qilin and could roughly sense the other party's mood and distance. But ever since this red-clothed evildoer appeared, the telepathic connection between her and the little Qilin seemed to have been cut off. She could no longer sense it. Presumably, Kirin couldn't sense her presence either. Her acupoints were sealed and she couldn't even speak. He could only grit his teeth and bear with it. Shui Ilan seemed to have sensed the stiffness of her body. He looked down at her and asked, "Are you afraid?" His voice sounded ethereal in the hurricane. At this moment, she could no longer be afraid. Ning Shuema had also thrown caution to the wind. At worst, she would die. What was there to be afraid of? She ignored him. Meow, she was not afraid of death, but the living torture was hard to bear. The wound on her back was so painful that she was scratching her heart and liver. Before the cold sweat could seep out, it was blown dry by the wind. Shue Elon glanced at the wound on her back, and a touch of anger rose from the bottom of his eyes. Suddenly, he sneered. Not only did he not slow down, he even sped up. In an instant, he reached 300 miles per hour. The hurricane was like a knife. Ning Shuima couldn't even breathe. Her vision turned black, and she finally succeeded in passing out. Kirin was about to go crazy. It had only been separated from its master for a short while. It had only run to the kitchen of the largest restaurant in Daliang City to have a feast. Suddenly, it lost contact with its master. The chef in the restaurant was really good to this blue cat. He fed it many specialty snacks. It ate until its little belly was round, and it forgot about everything else. Chapter 510. When Kirin thought of its master and wanted to sense her, it couldn't sense her anymore. It was so shocked that it didn't have time to wait for the lotus root pink meatballs that were about to be taken out of the pot by the chef. It ran away as fast as it could. It remembered that the last time it sensed its master, she was on a boat. However, Daliang City was a city on the water. There were many lakes and even more boats. Which boat was she on? Due to the broken connection, it couldn't sense how far away she was. It could only search blindly. It first went to a few lakes in the city and sniffed at the shore of those lakes. If it couldn't smell anything, it would immediately move to the next spot. Therefore, the people strolling by the lake would occasionally see such a scene. A blue cat was running around on the shore like crazy. It flew like lightning and disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was so fast that those who saw it felt like they had seen a ghost. Or they thought they were seeing things. It was a water Kirin and was naturally sensitive to water. Therefore, it didn't need to ask for directions and could find the next lake by instinct. After searching 3 or 4 lakes with this method, it finally remembered that the last time it contacted its master, there seemed to be the sound of a zither next to her. What kind of boat would have the sound of a zither? Kirin had too little social experience and couldn't remember at the moment. However, it had a solution. It stopped an elegant young man by the lakeside, stood upright, and asked, "Excuse me, what ship would have the sound of a zither?" The gentleman thought that the little blue cat with smooth fur was cute. Seeing that it was stopping him, he thought it was funny and bent down to pick it up. The moment it opened its mouth, the young master was so scared that he fell over. He sat on the ground and said, "Grandpa, cats can talk." "I'm not a cat." Kirin was angry and wanted to slap him with its paw. However, it thought that it wasn't the time to be calculative. So it held back and said, "Tell me, what kind of boat would have the sound of a zither?" Although the gentleman was not brave, he was a frequent visitor to brothels. He tried to hold back his shivering and answered, "Usually, the girls on the flower boats would play the zither often." Flower boats? Boats that transport flowers? Kirin didn't quite understand. Cough. "No, it's a place for men to have fun. There are many beautiful girls on the ship." Kirin's eyes lit up. Although it didn't know what a place for men was, it felt that the beautiful girl, whose owner was the beautiful girl, must be on some kind of flower boat. So it humbly asked what kind of boat was called a flower boat and what were its characteristics. When the man saw a cat asking about this, he was shocked, scared, and a little amused. So he told it the detailed characteristics of the flower boat. Kirin memorized it and turned around to look for the flower boat. The so-called flower boats were actually those beautiful pleasure boats. There were usually colorful gauze fluttering outside and red lanterns hanging at the bow of the boat. Sure enough, the sound of a zither could often be heard from these ships. Kirin first wandered around the lake, sniffing for the scent of its master. As long as Ning Shuima stayed by the lake, it would be able to find her. Its search speed was not slow, but there were too many lakes in and outside the city. By the time it finally found Thousand Bright Lake, nearly 4 hours had passed. It finally smelled Ning Shuima's scent and immediately began to search for the flower boat on the lake. Chapter 511. Sure enough, there were many beautiful girls on the boat, but none of them was its owner. Moreover, these girls were dressed more boldly than their owners. They walked awkwardly with their butts swaying. Some of them even exposed their snow-white bellies. These girls were also more open than their owners. They often clung tightly to the men or even snuggled into their arms, using their lips to feed the men. Kieran felt disgusted when he saw this. Those ugly, handsome, old, and young men all had a look of enjoyment on their faces. Their palms were caressing the girls' bodies, making the girls giggle. Kieran was puzzled as he did not know what they were doing. However, he did not care about that at this time. Every time he got on a boat, he would search the entire boat. No one paid special attention to him as he scurried around the boat. It was also very convenient for him to search. The scenery on these boats was actually quite similar. He even saw a man and a woman lying on a big bed in the room of a boat. They had taken off their clothes and were fighting there. The woman was obviously at a disadvantage. She kept gasping for breath. No, no, ouch, it hurts. Please, please let me go. However, the man did not have the slightest intention of letting go. He held onto the woman tightly, his waist shaking, and used his stomach to slap the woman. He even said fiercely, "Little demoness, today I must kill you. You little demoness." Kieran originally thought that it was a little strange for them to take off their clothes and fight. He paused for a moment and took a few more glances. When he heard what the man said, he was immediately furious. It was already infuriating for a man to bully a weak woman, but he actually wanted to kill the other party? That was too embarrassing for men. In anger, he pounced on the man's back. He stretched out his sharp claws and scratched the man's back fiercely. That man was having a good time when he suddenly got scratched. He screamed and immediately went limp. With his back full of blood, he jumped up. Damn, what is this? Damn, where did this fierce cat come from? Kieran opened his eyes wide and warned sternly, "If you bully a woman again, I will bite you to death." God. Cat demon. The cat has become a demon. The man and woman in the room screamed. Kieran had no time to waste with them. After warning them, he flew out of the window. Chaos ensued on the ship. A moment later, everyone on the ship was looking for the talking cat. Kieran, on the other hand, had already jumped onto another flower boat and began its journey to find its master. Not long after, some people on the ship were also scratched by the ferocious cats, and chaos ensued. Kieran was very depressed. It had seen men bullying women on several of the brothel boats today, and they were in all kinds of positions. After it scratched the men, the women who were being bullied also screamed and looked for sticks to hit it. He simply didn't know what was good for him. These flower boats were connected to each other. In less than an hour, all the flower boats in the lake knew about the cat demon. They were all looking for the blue cat that had caused trouble. When the little Cheelin boarded the boat again, it wasn't as smooth. Just like now, when it had just jumped onto a flower boat, it was immediately chased down by the turtle slave who was on guard against the demonic cat with a big stick. Those people chased it so fiercely that it had no choice but to jump into the water. Chapter 512. Kieran felt that it was too slow to swim in the water, so it decided to fly on the surface of the water, which attracted screams from the surrounding boats. Some people even started to shoot at it with arrows and threw stones at it. Kieran deeply felt that the people on the flower boats were too unfriendly. Why would its master board this kind of boat? Which boat was she on? What kind of danger was she in? Could it be that she was being bullied by a man like what it saw on the boat? It was flying gloomily and accidentally bumped into someone's arms. With a loud bang, it was knocked into the ground, causing it to feel dizzy. "Why are you running around? Where is your master?" A voice like ice and snow came from above its head. Kieran's body stiffened. This was the voice that it feared the most. All its fur stood up. It suddenly raised its head and looked into a pair of beautiful deep blue eyes. Han Shanyue. Han Shanyue was also floating on the water, his moonlight robe fluttering behind him. He Why is he here? The reason why his master ran away was to escape from him. Kieran's eyes widened. Its mouth opened so wide that a duck egg could be stuffed in. Han Shanyue frowned. Speak. Where is your master? On the flower boat. Kieran's brain was still in a state of paralysis, so it subconsciously answered. She actually boarded the flower boat? This girl was simply unrestrained when she did things. Was there any place that she did not dare to go? Which one? These 3 words came out of his mouth coldly. I don't know. I am also looking. I have looked for many boats. Kieran was inexplicably pressured by his body and stuttered. Is the telepathy between you and her fake? Why don't you ask her? Han Shanyue's body seemed to be even colder. I can't sense her. I don't know who cut it off. I can't sense her. Could she have died? Whoa. The little Qilin was anxious and scared, and its eyes were filled with tears. Shut up. If she is dead, do you think you can still live? Han Shanyue was almost defeated by this stupid Kieran. Did it think that the blood contract was fake? Was the function of the blood contract just to fool it? The little Qilin finally remembered the matter of the blood contract. That's right. It was still alive and well. This proved that its master was also alive. No, it couldn't sense her now. Did someone break the blood contract between it and its master? Its eyes were too transparent, and almost all of its questions were written in them. Han Shanyue immediately understood and reassured it. Stupid. This blood contract wasn't something that anyone could undo. Also, even if there is such an expert, both you and Ning Shuima have to be present. The little Qilin was relieved, but it was still a little puzzled. It looked at Han Shanyue in astonishment. You are quite familiar with the blood contract? It suddenly had an epiphany. My blood contract with Master couldn't have been established by you, right? Han Shanyue's eyes flashed. Who said that this little guy was stupid? It was quite smart sometimes. He was too lazy to answer it and only asked what he wanted to know. How did you and your master get separated? How did you know she was on the flower boat? Tell me the simple process. Kieran also knew that it was important to find its master now, so it quickly told him what happened after it broke up with its master. Han Shanyue finally understood what Kieran meant when it said that Ning Shuima was on the flower boat. Chapter 5:13. Han Shanyue glanced at Kieran unkindly and gave it a one-word evaluation. Stupid. Kieran was not convinced by his scolding and wanted to refute, but Han Shanyue had already thrown it into the lake. Wash your claws. Dirty. Its claws were still stained with the blood of the people it had scratched and almost touched Han Shanyue's body. Kieran finally remembered that its claws were still dirty and hurriedly washed them in the water. When it looked up, it saw Han Shanyue's sleeves fluttering as he walked towards the shore. Hey, wait for me. I will go with you to find my master. Kieran shouted from behind. I will look for her. You go wash your claws properly. Han Shanyue did not even turn his head. He and Kieran were chatting on the surface of the water and had already attracted the attention of countless people around them. Countless heads popped out from the boats and looked over. Han Shanyue ignored their gazes and flicked his finger. A bright white firework shot up into the sky and exploded in the dark blue sky, lighting up half of the sky. After a while, 8 people seemed to have emerged from the ground and appeared in front of Han Shanyue, who had already reached the shore. They bowed to him. Master, what are your orders? Han Shanyue ordered bluntly. Quickly find out which boat had a banquet 3 hours ago and report to me in 15 minutes. Yes. The 8 people replied in unison and scattered in all directions. Kieran hurriedly washed its claws and finally returned to the shore. It saw Han Shanyue standing there with his eyes looking into the distance and his fingers forming a seal as if he was calculating something. Mr. Han, do you have her whereabouts? Han Shanyue ignored it. Mr. Han, do you think my master will be bullied by the men like those women on the boats? Kieran felt that it had been traumatized. Han Shanyue. He looked at it unkindly and did not understand what it was saying, What did you see? I saw men bullying women, and they took off their clothes and pressed them down. They used their stomachs to hit the women, and the women screamed miserably. Kieran tried its best to describe it. Han Shangyue staggered for a moment. He looked at Kieran strangely for a moment. His gaze was unfathomable. Kieran was frightened by his gaze and shrank back. Why are you looking at me like that? Han Shangyue did not speak but sighed and stretched out his hand. A white light flew out from his fingertips and covered Kieran. His movements were too fast, and the little Qilin was caught off guard. It was instantly enveloped by his white light. At first, it still wanted to struggle, but after struggling for a while, it was unable to break free. Its expression gradually became confused. A moment later, the white light dissipated. The little Qilin shook its fur and looked at Han Shangyue blankly. Little apple, tell me, what did you see on those boats? The little Qilin blinked its eyes. I saw a lot of men, a lot of women, and also a lot of things to eat and play. That's all? That's it? Is there anything else? Little Qilin's eyes widened. However, it seemed to have forgotten to be forgotten something. Han Shanyue's face finally showed some satisfaction. He nodded slightly and ignored it and continued to calculate. Kieran looked at his fingers. His fingers were so beautiful, as if they were carved out of jade. There were no flaws at all. Master, you really know how to tell fortunes? Kieran looked at him as if he was a fraud. In its eyes, fortune tellers were all frauds. Chapter 5:14. Han Shanyue did not even bother to look at it. Is my master really a loner? Is she really that unlucky? Han Shanyue's voice was calm. My fortune has never been wrong. Although he had his own selfish reasons for saying that she was a loner, he was not wrong. That girl was indeed a loner, and not just a loner, but also, she is really a loner. Kieran lowered its head. It thought that Han Shanyue was just fooling it. Then she really can't marry in the future? Han Shanyue finally looked at it as if he was looking at an idiot. Didn't I say that I would marry her? Aren't you afraid that she will jinx you? My life is harder than hers. I am not afraid of jinx. Ah, so you are marrying her because of this? Just to accept her? Not to let her be alone for the rest of her life? You can say that. So you are so kind. Kieran was touched and could not help but sigh. Master, are there many loners in this world? If there are many of them, and they are all women, how many concubines do you have to marry? Han Shanyue was speechless. He could not help but feel speechless. It was as if he was picking up trash. Was he such a busybody? He had traveled the world for so many years, and he had seen many loners. But the only one that attracted his attention was Ning Shuema. He did not want to chat with this silly and naive Kieran anymore. So he coldly said, not every piece of trash I like to accept. Kieran opened its eyes wide and said angrily, my master is an elite. No, an elite, not a piece of trash. Oh right, you said that your life is hard. Are you also a loner? Or the most powerful loner? It seemed to have suddenly realized something. No wonder my master did not want to marry you. She must be afraid that you will jinx her to death. My master is really wise. Han Shanyue was speechless. He had the urge to kick this little Qilin into the lake. Could that girl really escape? No one had ever escaped from his grasp. Master. The 8 subordinates came back one after another. They all bowed to him and told him what they had heard. 2 hours ago, there was indeed an official Guqin recital. All of the high-ranking Guqin players in Daliang City participated, including the young mistress of the Yin clan. It was said that the young mistress had a Guqin player named Shui with her, whose talents shocked everyone. An hour ago, there was a thick fog on the lake. Some people on the small boats saw the magnificent ship sailing into the thick fog. Later on, the fog dispersed, but no one saw the ship again. Because the lake was very large and wide, and there were many bends and forks, the ships could not always see each other. Therefore, the disappearance of the ship did not attract much attention. However, The 8 guards had searched every corner of the lake, but they couldn't find any trace of the ship. It was as if the ship had disappeared into thin air. Kieran was shocked. Did the ship sail into the space-time hole? Han Shangyue glanced at it, and Kieran immediately said, "This is what my master told me." She said that in some mysterious places where she came from, ships and planes would often disappear for no reason. Some people guessed that they might have entered the space-time hole. It is another space-time hole. In response to Kieran's worries, Han Shangyue only commented, "She is dreaming, and you are not awake either." Chapter 5:15. Han Shanyue's gaze turned to the 8 guards. Before the ship disappeared, was there anything strange on the lake? One of the guards said, "It was a bit strange." The people who saw the ship said they didn't see anything strange, but they seemed to be a bit confused. They all said that after the ship disappeared, they had a headache and seemed to have forgotten something. Han Shanyue clenched his fingers. The memory erasing technique. He thought that he was the only one who knew how to use it. He didn't expect there to be a second person. The image of the red-clothed evildoer, Shui Elon, flashed across his mind. His eyes were cold. Before this, did they see a man in red? The other guard thought for a while and said, there was indeed a person who said that when the zither music was beautiful on the big ship, a man in red came on a small boat and played an even more beautiful zither music. However, the person who said this was a half-drunk man, and the others thought that he was talking nonsense. No one believed him. It was him. He didn't expect that guy to chase him all the way here. Did he and Shuima meet on purpose, or was it just a coincidence? The Guqin souls of the Guqin players on the ship should be enough for that bastard to repair his Guqin. And Ning Shuima, if she fell into his hands, how would he treat her? Would it be, after instructing the 8 guards, his figure flashed and floated towards the direction where the ship had disappeared. He had to find an abnormal aura in that area of the water to deduce what kind of technique Shui Elon had used to transport the ship away, as well as the possible destination of the ship. Kieran jumped up when it heard the 2 words red-clothed. It followed Han Shanyue closely. Master fell into the hands of that red-clothed pervert again? God, that pervert always had bad intentions towards her. He will kill her. Oh no, oh no. That red-clothed pervert who bites the hand that feeds him is after my master. Will he fry my master first and then kill her? As soon as the last few words came out of its mouth, its 4 paws suddenly staggered and fell into the lake with a splash. Han Shanyue's cold voice sounded, "Little apple, if I hear you speak rudely again, I will fry you first and then fry you." Kieran emerged from the water and wiped the water droplets off his face with his claws. Since when did it speak rudely and use random words? Wasn't it supposed to be fried first and then killed? Instead, he killed them first before frying them? It seemed to be more reliable to kill before frying. Only after killing can you fry it, right? However, it seemed to have overheard its master saying something about frying first and then killing. Not knowing the word, he went to ask Tom. Tom's explanation was that he would fry them after killing them. It raised its head and saw that Han Shanyue had already drifted away. It hurriedly followed him. When it caught up to Han Shanyue, he was standing on the surface of the water, deep in thought. How is it? What do you think? Have you found the whereabouts of that ship? Where did you go? Kieran asked again. It was thick-skinned and was not afraid of sticking its warm face to the cold but of this big ice cube. Han Shanyue ignored it. His lips curled up coldly. Fog demon conveyance technique. That guy was really willing to spend money. He actually used this method to take the ship away. He was already injured, and then he used this technique which consumed a lot of psychokinesis to move the ship, and then he used the Guqin spirit to repair the strings. Under such continuous consumption, he was probably an arrow at the end of its flight. Perhaps this time, if it caught him again, it would be able to get rid of him once and for all. Master, can you find him? How? Kieran asked. Chapter 5:16. We have to hurry. Give me a general direction and I'll use my nose to find her. My nose is very sensitive. Master can't stay in his hands for too long, or else she will be at a disadvantage. Kirin said hurriedly. Shut up, don't be noisy. Han Shangyue shouted to stop its nagging. His heart was in a mess because of its noise. He had dealt with many demons in his life, so he was used to being calm. No matter what happened, he could plan and plan in an orderly manner to deal a fatal blow to the enemy. Only this time, his heart was in a mess. The worst thing to do at this moment was to be in a mess. Although the little girl was a troublemaker, she was smart enough to hold on for a while. He would rush to save her. Kirin felt that it was about to smoke from its anxiety. Looking at Han Shangyue's calm and steady manner, it was also angry. Humph! This person was really heartless to its little master, right? Master was in the bad guy's hands, but he was not worried at all. But why was its master facing so many disasters? She was walking on the edge of danger every day, without a moment of peace. It accidentally muttered this sentence out loud. Han Shangyue finally looked at it and said lightly, she has a blade in her life, so naturally she will face disasters at every step. Is there any way to solve it? Kirin felt that it might be good to listen to the trickster's words. Master should change her luck. She needs to find a strong backing. Han Shangyue said. Strong backing? Kirin blinked its big eyes and suddenly had an epiphany. I know. Master should go to the Sun Moon sect to become a disciple. Now the Sun Moon sect is the strongest. All the sects are afraid of it. If she can become a disciple of the Sun Moon sect, maybe no one will dare to find trouble with her. She can also live a peaceful life. Han Shangyue was speechless. His eyes were unreadable. Little apple, do you think I'm not strong enough? If that girl stayed by his side, all these would not have happened. But she wanted to escape. Kirin looked at him seriously. You are indeed strong, but Master is not willing to be anyone's concubine. She said it was an insult to herself. If she enters the Sun Moon sect, she will at most be a disciple. No one will make her a concubine. Han Shangyue raised his eyebrows and pursed his lips. You don't want to be a concubine? Are you willing to be my disciple? However, he had set a rule that he would no longer accept female disciples. Was he going to break the rules for her again? He seemed to have broken too many rules for her. Kirin, on the other hand, seemed to have suddenly found a broad path for his master. He immediately beamed with joy. The venerable emperor of the Sun Moon sect thinks highly of my master. Perhaps he will personally take her as his disciple. It was said that the ancestor was extremely protective of his disciples and would not allow anyone to bully them. As long as little mistress can become his disciple, everyone will give face to the ancestor and won't dare to make trouble for her. Han Shangyue glanced at it lightly. The ancestor thinks highly of her? Why don't I know about it? You're not omnipotent, so of course you don't know. Thinking back to when my master was almost executed in a public square, it was the ancestor who personally stepped in and saved her. I heard that the ancestor doesn't meddle in other people's business, but for the first time, he stood up for my master. It's clear that he values my master very much. Han Shangyue was speechless. Indeed, he did not like to meddle in the affairs of the mortal world. That day, he did not know why, but he seemed to have a sudden impulse. Chapter 5:17. Also, Dizun has no regard for mortals. But when he was in the palace, he took pity on my little mistress. He was afraid that she would be frozen by his cold air, so he let her out for the first time. Kirin continued to list. This was what he had heard from the servants when he was in the Marquis's mansion. Han Shangyue's eyes flashed slightly, but he still did not speak. Moreover, the ancestor never gossiped about people, but when he left vast Sky Empire, he solemnly told the old emperor about my master. The little Qilin gave the third example. Han Shangyue raised his hand and rubbed between his eyebrows. This third time was indeed intentional. He just wanted to take advantage of that girl's rotten peach blossom. Out of the three examples, only the last one was slightly more reliable. Tell me, don't you think the ancestor values my family's little master? The little Qilin confidently concluded. Han Shangyue smiled slightly. After hearing what you said, it seems to be the case. Why don't you encourage your little mistress to go to the Sun Moon sect and become a disciple? Dizun can indeed protect her to grow up safely. Let's see if he will accept your mistress. I heard that he only accepts a disciple once every 80 years. It has only been 40 years, so it's not time for him to accept a disciple. Also, he doesn't accept female disciples. Rules are set by people, so naturally, they can be changed. My little mistress is so smart. Dizun will definitely accept her. Kirin was full of confidence. Then, I will wait and see. Han Shangyue picked it up from the water and pointed at it. Kirin involuntarily returned to its original form. Han Shangyue jumped on its back and said, "Everything can wait until we save your mistress. Go to the chaotic river." Kirin's eyes lit up. It tore open its 4 hooves and began to run. After running for a few feet, it asked embarrassedly, "Where is the Wonton River?" Han Shangyue. His voice was cold. "Looks like she really wants to raise you into a cat. A Qilin beast actually doesn't know the distribution of rivers in this continent." Kirin was afraid of him and did not dare to answer at this time. Han Shangyue pointed out the path for it and threw it a map. He said coldly, "Within 3 days, memorize this map completely. I will check your homework." Kirin. No, it hated reading books, and it hated memorizing books even more. Master, where are you?" When Ning Xuema woke up, she found herself in a dilapidated temple. The sky outside was still dark. Looking out of the broken window, he could only see a few scattered stars. It was very dark in the dilapidated temple. If Ning Xuema's psychokinesis hadn't reached a certain level and could see things in the dark, she might not have been able to see anything at this moment. He didn't know which deity was worshipped in the dilapidated temple. Most of the golden paint on the statue had been peeled off. Under the statue was a small table, and below it were a few praying mats. She was lying on a string of praying mats. The praying mats were rough, and although she was wrapped in a red robe, she still felt flustered. In particular, the wound on his back was burning with pain. When Yifeng took her as a hostage, he looked fierce, but in fact, he knew when to stop. At that time, the sword had only pierced through her skin and did not injure her vitals. If it was handled properly, it wouldn't even need to be bandaged. But now, it hurt so much. It must have been cut by the hurricane when he carried her away. Shuailan didn't know what medicine he gave her, but her head was still a little dizzy. Although she was awake, her vision was blurry. Chapter 5:18. There seemed to be some movement behind her. Ning Xuema turned around and secretly clenched her fists. Shuailan was sitting on a praying mat not far behind her. His eyes were slightly closed. It was a posture of meditation, as if he was meditating. In the night, his face was a little pale. His originally rosy lips were also a little dry and dull. He was injured. Ning Xuema was overjoyed and quietly stood up. Not bad. Her acupuncture points were unsealed. She could move freely. She slightly activated the psychokinesis in her body, but she couldn't feel it. She looked at Shuailan unkindly. Needless to say, this bastard sealed her psychokinesis again. Damn it. When she didn't have any psychokinesis, everyone called her a good-for-nothing. Now that she had cultivated a little, whoever caught her would seal it. Her psychokinesis had no place to be used. In this world, martial prowess was indeed the way of the king. One day, she would become the king of this world. She would definitely seal up all these people who had dragged her around and let them have a taste of being bullied and humiliated by others. She stood up and didn't do anything else. She was like a cat hibernating in the dark, silently observing her opponent's reaction. Shuailan didn't move. This bastard was usually as alert as a snake. Now that he was so quiet, Could it be that he was seriously injured? Or was he testing her again? Ning Xuema tried to walk towards the door. She had already opened the door of the rundown temple. The night wind blew in and caused Shui Elan's clothes to flutter. Shui Elan still didn't move. This bastard was seriously injured. Ning Xuema's eyes flashed with a murderous intent. This bastard had been following her like a ghost, trying to kill her from time to time. If he didn't die, she would never have a day of peace. She might as well take this rare opportunity to get rid of him. She turned back. She walked casually, as if she was just at the door to take a look at the scenery. All the weapons on her had been taken away by Shui Elan. Her psychokinesis was also sealed. She was barehanded, so it was impossible for her to kill him. Shui Elan must be thinking the same thing. That was why, after sealing her psychokinesis, he sat there and calmly meditated. He didn't guard against her anymore. In the dark, Ning Xuema's lips slightly hooked up. She slowly approached Shui Elan, without the slightest murderous intent. Shui Elan didn't guard against her and didn't react to her approach. Just as she was about to reach him, Ning Xuema tapped the ground with the tip of her foot, and her body shot out. A pair of shabby chopsticks appeared in her palm, which she then stabbed towards Shui Elan's temple. Although her psychokinesis was sealed, she still had her inner strength. Although her inner strength could not be used as a hidden weapon like the legendary flying leaves and picking flowers, it was still quite profound. When she attacked, it was as fast as lightning. Although it was just two broken chopsticks, its power was not inferior to a sharp sword. Agile and elegant, natural and smooth. This move was perfect. As long as Shui Elan was stabbed by her chopsticks, he would become a bloody gourd. Seeing that the chopsticks were about to pierce his head, her wrist suddenly tightened and a strand of black hair wrapped around her arm. Her wrist hurt and her hand lost strength, causing the chopsticks to fall to the ground. Then her waist tightened and the world spun around her. By the time she reacted, she was already lying on the ground with Shui Elan's entire body pressing down on her. This time, he hit the wound on her back. Her face turned pale, and she couldn't help but gasp. Chapter 519. However, she paused midair and stared wide-eyed at Shui Elan's handsome face that was suddenly closing in on her. She was so nervous that her body stiffened. Shui Elan's eyes shone brightly in the night. He didn't look injured at all. You pretended to be injured on purpose? Ning Xuema glared at him. She cursed this bastard in her heart for being crazy. If he wanted to kill her now, it would be easier than killing an ant. Why did he pretend to be injured to test her? He wanted to see if she would do anything to him? He wanted to see if she couldn't bear to do that to him? Was he crazy? How could she not bear to do that to him? She was simply too heartless. Was there even a need to test her? Shui Elan's breath was right next to her face. It was warm and carried a faint fragrance, making all the hairs on Ning Xuema's body stand up. She struggled a bit, wanting to send him flying with a kick. However, her body was firmly restrained by him, and she couldn't move at all. She could only watch as his handsome face came closer and closer. It was so close that it was already touching her earlobe. Little Xuema. So you hate me so much that you want to kill me whenever you have the chance. There was a hint of grievance in his voice. Ning Xuema looked at him with a, "Are you crazy?" Look. She couldn't be bothered to reply to him. How can you bear to do that to me when I'm so nice to you? Shui Elan turned on his resentful wife mode. It was a success. Ning Xuema had goosebumps all over her body. You're nice to me? Ning Xuema was furious. I released you from the coffin. Not only are you not grateful, you've even tried to harm me time and time again. I almost lost my life in your hands a few times. Is this being nice to me? What will happen if you don't treat me well? Little Xuema, we have to be refined people. Don't be so rude. Shui Elan stroked her lips with his finger. Isn't your little life still fine in your body? Look, you're still alive and kicking even now. yelling at me and plotting against me. I don't even want to bicker with you. You should know that those who have offended me usually end up being skinned alive, but I can't bring myself to do it to you. Isn't this good for you? Ning Shuima really wanted to laugh at him. Was not skinning and breaking the bones of his savior a kind person? This was simply demonic logic. She did not want to pay any more attention to him. He simply closed his eyes. Suddenly, his eyelashes heated up. His voice was low and teasing. Little Shuima, your expression. Are you inviting me to bed you? Ning Shuima's body stiffened. She quickly opened her eyes to look at him and replied, Go to hell. This bastard looked refined, but he actually said such words. Even if I die, I will die under the peony flower. Shui Ilan's eyes gradually deepened. At this moment, their bodies were tightly pressed against each other. Ning Shuima could even feel the heat of his body, as well as the obvious male changes in his body. Her heart beat rapidly. In a panic, she couldn't help but grasp at the life-saving straw. Shui Ilan, you can't be so perverted. I'm only 13 years old. Your body is already 18 years old. It can withstand the nourishment of a man's rain and dew. Shui Ilan's palm had already begun to caress her back. Moreover, I also like delicate bodies. Even if you're really 13 years old, you're still very much to my liking. Don't worry, I'll be very gentle with you. You'll taste the most extreme ecstasy. His hand that was wandering around her back was like a poisonous snake. Ning Shuima's nervous fingers also stiffened. She suddenly had an epiphany and shouted, Blackwave Zither! Chapter 520. As expected, Shui Ilan's body stiffened. He squinted his eyes. What's wrong with the Blackwave Zither? The person who gave you the Blackwave Zither was a woman, right? Your sweetheart? You must love her very much. You can't do anything to betray her. Ning Shuima guessed randomly. She felt that Shui Ilan's attitude towards the Blackwave Zither was unusual. When he hugged it, it was as if he was hugging his lover. Shui Ilan pressed on her body, but he didn't do anything else. He looked down at her. His green eyes were dark, as if he was looking at someone else through her. Ning Shuima held her breath slightly. She tried her best to be gentle. She didn't want to provoke him and make him go wild again. After a while, he sighed softly. A look of approval flashed across his eyes. Little Shuima, what you said might be true. The Blackwave Zither was hers, but I forgot about her. Ning Shuima, what was going on? Why was she so confused when she heard this? Shui Ilan's fingers touched her lips again. I can't remember her appearance. I can't remember anything about her. But I feel that I should love her very much. She sealed me in a coffin. I should hate her to death. Isn't this like what you humans call love and hate? He lost his memory about that woman, so he couldn't love and hate her? Was that abnormal? You can try to find her. Maybe you'll remember everything when you find her. Ning Shuima guided him patiently. I don't know how to find her. I can't even remember her identity. That's okay. Since she could seal you, her psychokinesis must be very high. She must be a famous person on this continent. You can try to ask around, or you can wander around with this zither. If you say it's hers, she might come to find you when she hears the sound of the zither. Shui Ilan tilted his head and looked at her. You're thinking for me? Of course, I hope that the two of you can resolve all your grudges. Look, when she sealed you, she clearly left you a way out. Clearly, she isn't completely heartless towards you. Perhaps you did something wrong to her, which made her hate you so much that she sealed you. You see, even if you've forgotten her, she's still there in your subconscious. You two are a pair of lovers. As long as you find her, you might be able to resolve all the misunderstandings and live happily ever after with her. Ning Shuima tried her best to draw out a beautiful blueprint for him. She tried her best to find something for him to do so that he would not always find trouble with her as if he had nothing better to do. What you said makes sense. Shui Ilan nodded. It seemed that he agreed with her. Ning Xuema was secretly delighted. She continued, "Of course what I said makes sense. Let me go first. You know that girls are very narrow-minded when it comes to love. They can't tolerate even a grain of sand. The most intolerable thing was for a lover to be two-timing. If you really love her and want to get her back, you should keep your chastity for her. Girls are very particular about this." Shui Ilan's expression was a little strange. He looked at her and suddenly said something shocking. "Why do I feel like you're her?" Ning Xuema secretly rolled her eyes. "How could that be? I'm not her. The person who sealed you must be a genius, and I'm so weak." Ning Xuema tried to reason with him. Damn it, if she was that woman, she would have sealed this bastard 800 times already. Why would she need to talk so much nonsense with him? "But I have a special feeling for you. I always feel that you're the person I should be closest to." Shui Ilan's fingers stroked her long eyelashes again. "You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.